We have Conduit, who made a video about friend of the stream Taylor Lorenz.
Between May of 2025 and early January 2026, Elon Musk's AI Grok found increasing popularity with certain Twitter users for creating sexualized deepfakes of other users' photos as a way to troll and harass them. Bloomberg reported that at one point over 6,700 image requests were being made per hour, affecting both women and children. Though Grok has been updated to restrict its image creation capabilities, this was just another in a long line of incidents that have led to louder and louder calls on lawmakers to regulate social media platforms and to protect the kids who use them from potential abuse and harms to their mental health. The solutions drafted thus far have been met with skepticism and criticisms ranging from data privacy issues to...
Oh my god, enough with the panic about kids using smartphones.
Taylor Lorenz is a tech journalist who has written multiple articles and made several videos about this proposed legislation, its effects and unintended consequences, as well as about the state of social media itself.
In response to this media-driven outcry, this fear among older generations has reached a terrifying fever pitch. Recently, much of this panic has been driven by the mainstream media and one man, an author named Jonathan Haidt. But although many of Haidt's claims about the dangers of...
She is 100 million % paid, foreign paid, guaranteed. She is. I know she is. I can feel it in my bones, okay?
young people using social media feel true, especially to parents, boomers, and media pundits.
I think the arguments she's put forward about social media restrictions warrant some dissection to see what they really mean and what you should take away from them. Like, subscribe, Patreon, merch. Now let's get this TV rolling.
Haidt's book is like catnip for white, suburban, upper-middle-class parents, media figures, and politicians who, rather than address the complex and systemic issues shaping most people's experience of the world, crave a quick fix. And smartphones and social media are a really easy scapegoat. Social media is dominated by companies that have spent the past decade putting profit above the safety and well-being of their user base. They rely on fundamentally exploitative and irresponsible business models that no serious person would argue haven't led to some real-world harm.
Now, what she has established is social media's dominance in culture also makes it an easy target, and social media's main problems are isolated to data privacy issues. The result is, by keeping the most directly relevant issues of social media outside the broad framework of digital privacy, she can present unrelated criticisms as...
Do you think she's getting paid to have this take on social media specifically? It feels like it, just because her takes are they're so out there. Like, I don't think you'll find anybody... I don't know if you'll find anybody like Taylor Lorenz in terms of the crazy, because like she doesn't believe in anything related to social media addiction. She says all of that is completely and totally fake. She thinks that kids should have unfettered access to every single device constantly. I feel like I saw a tweet recently where somebody was, I think a teacher tweeted out, like, ever since we did this experiment and we took phones away from kids in school, like the productivity has increased like some percentage or whatever. There was some huge thing. And she like quote tweeted and she was fighting with this, like even keeping phones from kids in school. She was fighting over that. And it feels like she's like relentlessly pro infinite access to online devices. And I've never heard anybody with these types of opinions before, because she's bought 100 trillion%.
as a distraction.
Those who actually study these topics professionally say that the science is not even remotely clear-cut and often shows the opposite of the narrative that Haidt is pushing. For instance, just last year, a massive study and review of research around kids and technology use concluded that social media is actually one of the least influential factors in predicting kids' mental health. Just recently, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine released a report that found essentially no significant link between young people's social media use and mental health problems. Leading developmental psychologist Candace L. Odgers, who has studied smartphones and social media use in children since 2008, said that she and her colleagues have, quote, repeatedly failed to find compelling support for the claim that digital technology use is a major contributor to adolescent depression and other mental health symptoms. Hundreds of other research papers, articles, and reviews have reached the exact same conclusions.
Now this is important because it's an example of something not inherently bad, until it's applied. There are a lot of studies done on the connection between social media and adolescent mental health. However, she does not present the way these studies came to this conclusion, instead choosing to quote from those conclusions. She also doesn't list her sources in the description of the video,
Queen.
but I also have an issue with doing that consistently, so I can't judge. But it is an issue. The result here is that it is an expectation that we should trust these sources for their conclusions rather than understanding why they came to these conclusions.
As Reason Magazine's Aaron Brown recently noted, many of the research papers that Haidt cites in The Anxious Generation contain coding errors, inappropriate statistics, he relies on irrelevant or outdated data, or data collected for totally different purposes analyzed in really flawed ways. Haidt cites 476 studies in his book that seem to represent this overwhelming case, but 2/3 of those studies were published before 2010, as in before the period that Haidt even focuses on in his book. So many of the studies that Haidt cites either have major methodological errors or don't actually say what he claims they do. Haidt also displays graphs throughout his book, showing that digital technology use and young people's mental health problems are rising together. But this doesn't really show anything. You could also put graphs showing an increase in young people wearing baggy pants over the past few years. That doesn't mean that the two things are causally related, and many mental health conditions have always arisen during puberty, even before smartphones existed. But this false notion that phones are causing an unprecedented mental health crisis is an irresistible narrative to parents who are primed to believe that their children are in constant danger from nefarious outside forces.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. There are several valid critiques of Haidt's analysis of teens and social media use. However, and this did take some investigation into the citations being used here, the Reason Magazine article being referenced specifically goes into how studies on subjective topics like this can be very unreliable without insight into their methodology. For all intents, Lorenz is doing the same thing she's criticizing by not elaborating on the studies beyond their conclusions.
The problem isn't just that the moral panic around smartphones and children is total BS. It's also incredibly dangerous because it mainstreams this really regressive worldview that is resulting in legislation that strips young people of civil liberties and ultimately causes immense harm to the most vulnerable kids, especially young women and LGBTQ youth. Researchers who actually study these issues have said time and time and time again that things like access to guns, sexual abuse, discrimination, racism, sexism, the opioid epidemic, economic hardship, and just the general state of the world are all far more influential factors in affecting young people's mental health. But it doesn't matter because what
Sexual abuse. We should just ban that.
Haidt is pushing feels true. It feels like the easiest explanation, especially to older people like those in the media and Congress. Haidt and this cadre of media pundits pushing this smartphone freakout say that there is this urgent need for government action to restrict young people's access to smartphones and social media. And that's leading to really scary laws that will restrict young people's access to information and take away their voices online. No more TikTok. It's back to CNN and mainstream media for the news, and don't you dare question.
Now we have an example of whataboutism. This is a moral panic, and it's causing harms to kids because it sweeps up all the good ways they can use social media. But she also says that there are other issues that cause more harm to kids psychologically, without specifying that the level of harm caused by social media, even if it's less, is also below a reasonable threshold. There is no justification for the reaction people are having to social media because other issues are worse, except for wanting to control kids' access to information.
I wish banning kids from social media and taking away their smartphones would solve all of their problems and give them a happy and carefree childhood. Unfortunately, I'm a millennial in my late 30s.
Sorry. Uh-oh.
Really?
And
She's 40 or 41. That's under Wikipedia right now. She must be fighting for her life to get that removed.
I'm old enough to actually remember what a cell phone and social media free childhood was actually like. And let me tell you, it was not the perfect world that Haidt and the media would have you believe. Your entire world was restricted to your physical reality, and you had absolutely no voice in the political system or ability to connect with anyone outside your immediate geographic area. It was an especially brutal time for young women and kids from marginalized groups. The mainstream media dominated everyone's information diet, and there was no way for young people to organize, dissent, or be heard. This is why you see nearly every major civil liberties group, LGBTQ organization, and human rights groups vehemently fighting against these proposed federal and state mandated social media restrictions on young people. For the most marginalized kids, social media is a lifeline. And even for non-marginalized kids, it provides a window and access to a broader world outside of a young person's physical reality. This is why far-right conservatives are so focused on cutting it off. They don't want kids to learn about the world around them through social media. They don't want them questioning mainstream media narratives and, for instance, becoming aware of things like the atrocities happening in Gaza or questioning the power of the 80-year-olds who run this country. Haidt and those
CNN article, nice.
Pushing this social media phone panic ironically want to coddle children. They want to keep them off the internet and restrict their social connections, which ultimately leaves them less informed and naive to the possibility of a better world. People in power recognize this as the end result. This is why lawmakers have expressed support for the TikTok ban, falsely claiming that the app is harming young people's mental health and, quote, poisoning their mind. This idea that the phone is a nefarious object that might brainwash your children into becoming mentally ill or gay is echoed by people like Haidt and those in Congress.
Where the prior segment was whataboutism, now we get to Mott and Bailey, the use of a defensible position to shield one's more indefensible position. Here we have the Mott, life before the internet and social media was more disconnected, that runs cover for the Bailey. The government, both sides, not just Republicans, is running a coordinated effort to keep people ignorant and to keep kids from making the world better. What that tells you is that this isn't actually about potential to harm kids, this is about keeping people slaves to capitalism, rather than individuals taking advantage of an already existing concern.
Setting aside the fact that being gay or trans isn't some sort of contagious diagnosis and young girls do not struggle with mental health issues for clout, Haidt's commentary is consistently used by the far right and liberals alike to push these backwards laws built off faulty logic. As Candace Odgers recently wrote in The Atlantic, two things can be true. First, the online spaces where young people spend so much time require massive reform. And second, social media is not rewiring children's brains or causing an epidemic of mental illness. And focusing solely on social media as the problem means that the real causes of these mental disorders and distress among young people go unaddressed. We should not send the message to families or teenagers that social media use is inherently damaging, shameful, or harmful. It's simply not true. Odgers writes that what she and her fellow researchers have seen from studying young people and social media is that they mostly use these tools to do regular adolescent stuff. They connect with offline friends from school, listen to music, watch shows, play video games with friends, and they watch YouTube videos like this one. Young people use social media and smartphones to seek out information about health, gender identity, to get support. For many marginalized kids and those who don't have support in their family or school lives, the internet is a safe space. It's a refuge. It's a place to explore, connect, be creative, and learn. It's quite literally a lifeline.
This is just a faulty assumption. Adolescents are using social media in constructive ways, assuming that information is being acquired correctly and understood correctly. From videos like this one, there's both sidesism intending to put the blame on everyone rather than one side that's specifically more at fault, and there's the conflation of struggles with mental health and the performance of struggles with mental health that's done for attention on social media. The nondescript issues with social media are minor compared to the ones that are overblown by the media, and kids can and will be effectively educated by their parents on how to use the internet and social media when they aren't being observed.
Some of the top academics studying kids and technology use said this, quote, "We believe the current slate of concerns around youth and social media use meet the criteria for a moral panic. Being able to recognize the moral panic about smartphones and social media use that Haidt and much of the mainstream media is pushing is perhaps best accomplished by examining the moral panics of decades past. Each time technology and media evolve, pundits will argue that this new technology or media is fundamentally different. Many of the arguments against allowing young people to read novels are nearly word for word the arguments used today against social media and TikTok. Some people sought to institute age limits on reading the news, lest young people learn too much about the world around them for their young age. It's notable that these moral panics are always pushed forward by academics, pundits, and concerned suburban white parents. Every single time, the same group of academic pundits, parents groups, and the media work together to whip up a frenzy, making the same exact arguments about TikTok as they did about novels, comic books, television, Walkmans, beepers, and more.
This isn't a good analogy, even though in Lorenz's words, it feels right. This moral panic is equivalent to all prior moral panics and can therefore be dismissed. The issues with social media themselves are equivalent to the issues with prior media and communications advancements. So despite your own conclusions being unresolved by this argument, you should dismiss them anyway without the knowledge to articulate why. Because there are valid reasons for concern about social media compared to concerns about the phones themselves.
Many young people today are too isolated. As the technology and media scholar Dana Boyd recently explained on my podcast Power User, kids today are not growing up in the same world that their parents or people like Jonathan Haidt did. Cities and suburbs today are far less walkable and bikeable than in decades past. Kids today also don't have nearly the amount of leisure time that they used to. They're inundated with hours and hours of homework and a growing list of extracurricular responsibilities, giving them less playtime than children had in just recent decades. Parents are also more likely to encourage their kids to stay home and stay indoors. Parents of color especially say that events like Trayvon Martin's death and the of countless other Black and brown youths in recent years have made them nervous to send their children out to play unsupervised. And kids today are facing increasing economic anxiety due to the precarious nature of our economy, wealth disparity, unstable housing, stagnant wages, and the ongoing pandemic, which is still over
I think so, yeah. Why?
Is she an influencer or a journalist?
Taylor Lorenz is like an influencer slash like pop journalist or whatever. She tries to market herself as like a serious like technology journalist or tech reporter. She doesn't know anything about tech or law. She's just like a pop tech kind of culture. Weird. She's very weird.
1,000 Americans a week and leaving millions and millions of young people and their caregivers disabled and forced out of the workforce permanently. In fact, just 2 years into the pandemic, back in 2022, nearly 8 million children had already lost a parent or primary caregiver to COVID-related causes. Yet none of these other factors are ever discussed by the media or lawmakers. This current generation of kids was also raised in the aftermath of the 2008 recession. And while Haidt and other pundits love to claim that the resulting economic chaos isn't a factor, since the unemployment rate has technically gone down, they ignore the broader economic instability that young people face under our current version of capitalism. And nearly 1 in 6 children in America lives below the poverty line. These are major structural issues with our society that taking away TikTok and banning kids from using cell phones won't fix. And I think it's worth noting that the same politicians on both sides of the aisle, along with those in the mainstream media who are backing this campaign to cut kids off from smartphones, also consistently vote and rail against things like gun control measures, youth mental health services, money for parks and public recreation, subsidized meals and childcare, all things that are actually proven to help kids' mental and physical health.
There are more significant issues to deal with in the world causing the mental health crisis, even though those issues are the ones most commonly discussed on social media, and the purpose and justification for trying to regulate social media are fabricated despite the obvious evidence otherwise, as well as the clear and obvious difference in records between the two main political parties. This is all a coordinated distraction so that the government can avoid dealing with real problems.
No one is claiming that these social media companies can't do better. Using social media the wrong way, especially if you're already struggling mentally, can have negative consequences. Literally anyone who uses the internet these days is acutely aware of its downsides. Platforms should undeniably roll out more robust user controls, data privacy protections, and responsible algorithmic recommendation systems. Parents also need to learn how to communicate with their children and build resilience and responsible technology.
Who's doing the analysis? This is Conduit, the guy who did the videos of like, I watched some content creator for a week.
And media consumption habits. As one robust recent research paper on the topic explains, social media is not like a toxin or nutrient for which each exposure dose has a defined link to a health-related outcome. Rather than comparing smartphones and social media to drugs, think of them as tools that can be used in a variety of ways. Human connection is good for us. We need it, especially vulnerable kids. But there are healthy ways to connect and engage with others, and then there are ways that are more indulgent. We need young people to have exposure to these technologies from a young age so that they can learn these lessons early and develop a healthy and productive relationship with the media and technology of their time. Understand that life is complicated. Respect young people enough to avoid the simple, glib, unfounded mass diagnosis and prescriptions that people like Jonathan Haidt and the media are shoveling out. Rather than feeding into these superficial narratives about young people and technology that are fundamentally unsupported by research, let's all work together to build a more progressive, inclusive, optimistic, and tech-enabled future for all of us.
Now that all of that is out of the way, I'm going to give my personal opinion. This is based on my own observations. I have no sources to back this up, somewhat intentionally for the sake of driving home 3 points. 1. Online media does affect your state of mind because, even with the meta admission I'm making right now, stating my perspective is going to imprint on you in a way that reveals itself when you form your own opinion. 2. Social media's financial goals requiring audience retention will exacerbate whatever issues end up driving people to it, because that need for escapism is what feeds social media's ability to be an escape. And 3. Even with my meta admission immediately prior to it, point number 2 still gave your mind something agreeable to your own opinion and was therefore likely easily accepted. All of which leads me to my actual perspective, which is this. Social media hijacks the skeptical part of your brain by providing positive, reinforcing encouragement for whatever your beliefs already are, which entrenches those beliefs to earn the reward, and the result is straying into greater ideological extremes in order to continue receiving them. The same way you can find yourself unconsciously drifting towards a soda in a convenience store because you want the sugar. If you don't have that moment of awareness to stop and register your actions, odds are you'll make the purchase before you've realized you've done it. I don't know if you can satisfyingly call that addiction, the same way it's defined for someone who has used actual drugs, but the framing here would imply that the use of social media for the benefit of vulnerable people is functionally different from the way described above that is harmful. Which isn't to say that the people finding their own community online is harmful. It's that there's nothing policing your relationship with that online community to provide you with the awareness to recognize when you're doing something you might otherwise not want to, and that the community you've joined is encouraging it. I actually agree with Lorenz here that this legislation most likely won't solve the problem in the right way, but the neutral descriptor of tool Lorenz applies to social media still strips the application of that tool by the companies behind them well before it reaches the hands of any users. And believe it or not, my perspective is actually reinforced by some of Lorenz's own reporting. In an article she wrote about Zoran Mamdani last year, she simultaneously says that social media did not drive his win, at the same time she calls out how many content creators and celebrities supported him. Her position is that Mamdani's own charisma and platform brought them in, as opposed to an intentional strategy of cultivating social media presence. But it's a chicken and egg situation. Regardless of which came first, they each feed into the other. And Mamdani himself might have undermined her argument by directly reaching out to content creators only a few months later. A strategy Lorenz reported about, but still used to reinforce that initial premise that it's not social media, it's Mamdani himself. She presents social media and personal charisma as separate instead of synergistic. You need the media to get the message out, and you need the message to cultivate the media. I think that additive requirement is what prevents social media from being a morally neutral tool. It only functions as a tool when one applies their perspective, and that immediately shifts it away from any sense of neutrality, positive or negative. I don't think anything I've just said is all that far from what the majority of people understand social media to be already. But if you've got feelings on it similar to mine, rather than reinforcing them with my own agreement, I just want you to be able to better articulate your own, which is really what my whole channel is about. So like and subscribe. And then comment if you liked and subscribed without consciously realizing it.
Well, I mean, I don't think I'd disagree with anything. Taylor's bad.
Really?
Really? How big of a deal are these people getting off the cruise ship?
Hold on, I'm thinking. I don't know. I didn't nuke the cruise ship.
How is that supposed to help us?
Don't have to worry about it. It's gone.
True. A housing policy fix that I've never heard of. This is impressive. The 3 real levers. Lever 1, change the electorate that decides, not get out the vote. Change which voters decide which questions. Move local elections on cycle with federal. Off-cycle local elections are the single biggest reason housing is illegal. Turnout drops from 60% to 15%. 50% are homeowners over 60. True! On-cycle elections roughly double turnout and shift the median voter 20 years younger and toward renters. This is the highest leverage electoral reform nobody talks about. It's also doable at the state level, not constitutional or no constitutional amendment needed. California passed SB 415 in 2015. It's working. Approval voting, or RCV, at the primary level first. Don't fight the general. Primaries are where extremists win with 22% of a 12% turnout. Reform there, and you change who makes it to November without touching the two-party system head on. And lowering the voting age for local elections to 16. Tested in a few U.S. cities and a few European countries. Increases lifetime turnout. Pisses off people who lose under it, which tells you it works. Wait, I linked the wrong video. Also, sorry. There you go.
16 for voting?
Problem? Trollface? Problem?
I don't know. We might need to up it. We just need a max voting age. That sounds actually fucking based.
Are you serious? What is it going to be, Mooten? 35?
Whenever you retire. 65. Or whatever it is.
True. Workers only. Okay. Ugh.
Ugh. Smashing it.
Problem? Oh, please don't say this is dead. Why would this be dead? Have you read anything about the Virginia stuff?
I got a huge thing from Bing this morning. If you'd like, I can read it out, or we can watch a video on it that he sent me. But I haven't read it yet.
Oh shit, hold on.
He said this is a good video. That's what he sent me.
One sec.
Giving you a second.
I have a list of tweets to look at.
Who gave you this list?
Don't worry about it. It's top secret.
I need to know because I might need them.
Watch. Tennessee Republicans laugh about stripping majority black Memphis of power as Warner walks in wearing a Trump flag cape. Jesus Christ. Todd Warner is a Tennessee representative. For those that didn't know. Although I know all of you know that, of course. Jesus.
House or Senate?
Representative, Senate.
Oh, Senate. Sorry.
Chaos erupts after Tennessee Republicans passed gerrymandered map to eliminate the state's only majority black congressional district. The new map will likely give Republicans control of all the state's U.S. House seats. Okay.
Gonna get pretty crazy out there soon.
Are these gerrymanders happening in response to the Supreme Court decision? Is that why they're able to do this now, or?
Yes.
This was the day after. Okay. Yep, it was a trigger bill. Gotcha. Mike Lee, this is a real guy, right? This is a real U.S. Representative, right?
I'll look him up.
I see this guy tweet so much fucking insane shit. I have to keep
U.S. Senator.
remembering that he's crazy. This guy is actually fucking insane.
Senator from Utah.
He's fucking crazy. He just tweets the craziest shit. State Representative Justin Jones burns a paper Confederate flag in protest of Tennessee's redistricting efforts. It's an insurrection only when Republicans do it. It's partisan gerrymandering only when Republicans do it. It's norm shattering only when Republicans do it. Please like and share if you're tired of the double standard. 43,000 likes, 14,000 retweets. His fucking Twitter name is Based Mike Lee. Oh my fucking god.
Y'all going? Now you got me all tied up. Now you got me all tied up. My brother ain't doing nothing to nobody. He ain't doing nothing to nobody. You don't walk out like yourself. Move the back. Boy! Yeah, let Pearson go. Let Pearson go. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Ted. You stupid mother.
He mad. This is Tennessee State Representative John Ray Clemens. Cuts through Representative Jason Zachary's Republican claim that the GOP's new gerrymandered map was drawn solely on a partisan basis since it relies on census data that does not include partisan statistics.
Yesterday, Speaker Sexton was asked about who drafted this bill and how this came about. He pointed to the Senate sponsors, Senator Stevens, Senator Johnson. Yesterday, Senator Stevens was asked the question, what numbers were relied upon to draw these maps? And his answer was pretty conclusive that it was census data. So
census data, he might explain this, but census data is bad because that means that they're not drawing maps for partisan reasons, which you're allowed to do legally, but they're drawing maps explicitly on racial boundaries, which would be kind of weird.
And Section 1 here refers to all census descriptions, so forth. So is that correct that the census data was the sole basis for drawing these lines from 2020?
Speaker Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, it's my understanding the census was used to draft the map you have in front of you.
Chairman Clemens.
Based on the population.
Okay, well, that's pretty
Question.
interesting because census data doesn't include any partisan scores or partisan data. And your entire argument this entire week has been that this is about politics and partisanship. So if you solely relied on census data, I'm confused about how you knew partisan scores when drawing this map, if that wasn't even considered.
Speaker Zachary.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Chairman Clemens.
If that's your answer, that is fine by me, and that is all I need.
Okay. Census data. I understand it tells you how many people are there, race, kids, etc., right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would this be a bad thing to use for drawing maps?
What if I told you that I was going to draw a new gerrymander, and I'm doing it on political consideration?
Okay.
Based on how people vote.
Sure. I would say that is probably I would say that that's a bad thing.
Well, it's legal, though.
Yeah, I understand it's legal.
Yep. But if I tell you I
Okay.
use the census data to draw it, the census data doesn't have anything about how people vote.
Okay. Now I'm getting it.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I see.
Not good.
Their conclusion just can't be followed.
Yeah, it
Because
was
census data
racially
doesn't
drawn. They're
have
trying to
anything.
draw
Yeah.
out like a race basically on the...
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone in chat said, well, Tennessee is just the first. Louisiana and a bunch more states are already lining up to get their maps passed ASAP. There's a very realistic chance that this is a 10-plus seat swing in the Republicans' favor. After all this is said and done, possibly. Jesus.
You aware that Memphis is predominantly African American?
I am not.
So to my sponsor, who went to law school at the University of Memphis and lived there for 3 years, you're telling me you're not aware that Memphis is predominantly African American. Am I
I didn't have any black friends there. Say it.
correct?
Senator Lamar, he's answered that.
Is the sponsor aware that Shelby County is predominantly African American?
I'm not aware.
Are you aware that Tennessee's 9th congressional district is the only majority African American congressional district in this state?
No, I have no knowledge of that.
Memphis is a majority black city with 0.9 to 65% of the population.
Problem, Trollface?
I had no idea that.
Feel like I've been in a Klan meeting for 3 days. I mean, it feels like that a lot of times on the House floor in Tennessee, but this was so blatant. It is utterly
Wait. They split up Memphis into 3 different pieces, effectively taking away all the seats. Hold on. Can you link me like a before and after for that map? I'm just curious what that looks like.
ridiculous.
How are
And
they allowed
when
to do that?
What do you mean?
Well, I would think that like if you're gonna do districts, it would be like city inclusive.
No, you can do it
I
however
didn't
you
think
want.
You, could, like,
you don't have to do it on any of those
I don't
grounds.
know.
The issue is that, and again, we'll go back to reading this probably after this, is that the Voting Rights Act, I think, was kind of supposed to prevent this. But Alito, from the 37 pages we've read so far, seems like Alito has basically said, as long as somebody doesn't say, I hate black people, while they're drawing their maps, then they're completely and
You're good to
totally
go.
scot-free, basically. Yeah, as long as you're not literally screaming from the rooftops that you're trying to racially gerrymander, there's no way that anybody can touch any of the
That's
maps you
because the
draw.
totality of the circumstances
It's gone. Yes.
kind of removed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now it's literally like, well, did they say it? Yes or no? Like
Basically,
I don't know.
yes. Yeah. Which is why that guy before was asking about, like, so how did you draw these maps using only census data? So, like, in the past, I believe when the Supreme Court shot down North Carolina trying to do a gerrymander, my guess is it would have been done. I didn't actually read the case. I just read articles about it because I wasn't reading a case back then. But they shot it down, I'm pretty sure, because the term they used was surgically targeted black people. And part of the reason was because North Carolina was literally requesting census data and doing it on racial boundaries. They were shutting down certain polling places, disallowing certain types of ID, changing like early voting restrictions, all things that were cutting against black people voting. And
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it was incredibly obvious enough to shoot it down. But now that same analysis, my guess is that analysis would fail now because they would say, well, unless they are actually not saying it, but
Do you think that this should have been legislated then?
It is utterly ridiculous.
I can't pause it. Sorry. Legislated? It was called the Voting Rights Act.
Sorry. What I meant is like it should we start putting things and codifying it into like amendments and shit? I understand that the barrier for that is really fucking hard.
The problem is
but
that
it seems like we're getting activist judges often now.
So one of the things that I kept arguing, but the problem is you just have to go so deep to understand this. One of the things I kept arguing before was that a lot with Hutch is that if you decided you want to do something, the legal argument is trivial. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. Like these people are fairly clever. Like in the Alito ruling, like the idea that the Voting Rights Act has stood for 40, however, or 50, whatever fucking years, and nobody has we've always assumed this one thing about it, but nobody's actually analyzed this thing about it. So we're going to completely turn this entire fucking law around on its head to completely reverse how it's ever been understood in the past. Like, if you're going to start getting into interpretations of law like that, I mean, you can basically just change and do whatever the fuck you want. It doesn't really matter. You can just do whatever. So, I don't know what law you could pass to save yourself from people like Alito and Thomas.
Yeah.
Times on the House floor in Tennessee, but this was so blatant. It is utterly ridiculous. And when you see, I stood up and I talked about how the map was racist, and I said it was a white power rally and all of these things. And then when one of my colleagues, a young black man, Rep. Justin Jones, used the same language I use, he was called out.
So I think Memphis is down here.
Mm-hmm.
The city is down here.
Instead of being 2, it's 3 now.
No, well, it was like majority. It seems 1, and now they've cut it into 3. It's kind of cut up on stream into 3 different.
I see what you're saying.
Where they've like taken away. Absolutely based. Sheesh.
Isn't it that in these districts, when they do this type of thing, that they can gerrymander and they can give themselves an edge, but they also do make themselves weaker in moments of like extreme turnout, right? Like if you were to,
yes, yep,
yeah, right. So it's not all bad. Like they're doing this, but they're also giving up some strongholds in exchange for trying to get more territory. So it can go against them as well.
Theoretically, yeah.
Sure.
Except in Massachusetts.
Is Nashville like in the center? Is it around here? Or
let's see. Nashville. Yeah, it's like center, like top center.
Gotcha. Cute.
How are state legislatures done? It's not like a popular vote where everybody in the fucking state, it's like done by, I would assume.
You mean how are like state congressmen or whatever chosen?
Yeah.
I have no fucking idea. Am I very per state? I don't know.
Because it seems pretty retarded that like you could live in Memphis and you get like 1 congressman, right? But then all of these retarded like fucking Republican districts all get like 10 because they're just more land. I don't know.
I don't know. Depends on other states too.
Trying to speak, and they were objecting to him saying the things. You know, how do you demonstrate how racist that House floor is by letting the white woman say what she wants to say, but when a black man does that, you object and cut his time?
Well, you know, the lawmakers that are responding to you tonight, they insist that this has nothing to do with race. They insist it was purely political. Listen.
The maps were drawn to maximize the potential Republican partisan advantage by winning and having a chance and opportunity to win all 9 congressional districts for the Republican Party.
What's your response? This is about red and blue, not black and white.
Bless their hearts. They are such liars. They know what they are doing. They absolutely know. As a matter of fact, one of the things that was said today on the House floor, which was very interesting and very telling, they said that they used census data to draw the maps, and then they claimed it was partisan. There's no partisanship in census data. They said the only data they used was census data. And then they said that it was based on partisanship, but there is no partisanship data with census data. So they're not the sharpest knives in the drawer. They're vicious, they're evil, and they're racist. But they're also cowards. They know that they can't win this next election on their ideas, and so they're going to have to cheat to get more seats. And that's what this was.
You think Hutch is sweating right now?
I don't know. The Republican Party to black voters as they silence their voice in Congress. Wow. What, I have 3 Gavin Newsom tweets. No vote in Tennessee, +1 GOP. No vote in Florida, +4. Missouri, +1. North Carolina, +2. Texas, +5. And then Virginia's maps were thrown out. Is this all the gerrymander gains that have been solidified so far? Or are these ones like coming down the pipeline as well? Like, did Florida finish their gerrymander, or?
Seems like these are finished now.
So how many did we get again?
Well,
I know we got California.
We got 5 in California. It's not good, Steven.
Ah.
What do you want me to say?
He didn't even include Mississippi and Louisiana.
Are those done? I would assume he didn't include it because they're not done.
Maybe, I don't know. Wait, what is? I don't understand what I'm looking at here. There's no way these are districts, are they? Or what? What state is this?
That is Indiana?
Illinois?
Oh, I got it.
Oh, he's just saying theoretically they could do it this way? It's not real, it's a meme. Gotcha.
I mean, yeah, we're in endgame gerrymandering.
We're in the endgame now, guys.
We're in the,
we gotta go back to the past. Confederate states are rushing through rigged maps to erase black districts off the map. If this doesn't make you angry, it should. Also, there was a, the norm was that you did your redistricting or your gerrymandering, whatever bullshit, that you did it every 10 years on the census data, right? This is a little bit out of the norm that states are rushing to do them. Okay, and then when Texas did their redistricting, was that because they were assuming ahead of time how the Supreme Court would rule? I'm trying to remember what the Pam Bondi memo was that told Texas they could redistrict. What was that letter from the DOJ? DOJ letter, Texas.
Is it this one?
It might be this one from July 7th.
Oh, no. Don't even look at mine.
This letter will serve as formal notice by the Department of Justice to the state of Texas of serious concerns regarding the legality of 4 of Texas's congressional districts. As stated below, these districts currently constitute unconstitutional coalition districts, and we urge the state of Texas to rectify these race-based considerations from these specific districts. What was the big motivation for the DOJ to send this letter? Did they know ahead of time, or did they have a signal ahead of time from Alito or from Roberts that they would be kicking out the Section 2, basically, of the Voting Rights Act, or? Because I think this was the thing that kind of kicked off our whole bullshit with the gerrymandering stuff. What are you going to do? Memer's going to meme.
I'm old enough to remember when Republicans in Ohio just ignored court rulings repeatedly and did it anyway. Well, Justin, Putin says the special military operation in Ukraine is coming to an end. Wow.
Problem?
Problem with your mom, yeah.
Yeah. Problem with my mom. You're gonna give her your dong. Gonna make her feel it for very long. Yeah.
Are you okay?
I'm rapping.
Watches Frontier Airlines aircraft forced to make an emergency stop after a pedestrian on the runway was struck and sucked into one of the jet's engines.
A pedestrian?
I don't think I can watch this on stream. Watches horrifying footage from from earlier this morning shows the moment Frontier Flight 4345, departing from Denver International Airport and bound for LA, was forced into emergency evacuation after a man reportedly walked onto the active runway and was sucked into one of the aircraft's engines during takeoff. The impact triggered a brief engine fire, which was quickly extinguished by airport firefighters. Officials later confirmed the individual had been walking on the runway prior to the incident, though the reason remains unknown and is now under investigation. No injuries were reported among the 231 passengers on board the aircraft. What the fuck? Officials have confirmed that the pedestrian jumped the perimeter fence and was hit just 2 minutes later while crossing the runway.
Bit of a rip bozo.
Well, I mean, it sounds like he was, like, suiciding, no?
I mean, that is a crazy way to commit suicide.
Well, I mean, what else do you think he could have possibly been doing?
I don't know. Maybe trying to steal a plane?
One sec. Apparently, Louisiana just started yesterday and had hundreds of people come testify. We have 4 different maps. One maintains the 4-2 split. We are 50-50 Dem Republican and 1/3 black citizens. 2 are 5-1 and 1 is 6-0. The feed for this particular video was cut and multiple verbal fights happened yesterday. We had elderly people testify that had been in the bus boycott and civil rights marches. We have had only 4 black congressmen since slavery. All 4 were here to testify. Our governor declared an emergency to redraw maps after ballots had already been received by the Secretary of State, so there's a slight chance the court rules it was too late to change it per our Constitution. Jesus. Well.
So at what point are Dem leaders going to lead protests over this? Any walks planned? Anything? Or are we just?
Well, I don't know what the point.
Cares?
What I don't know what you're supposed to do. Because like, we've done our No Kings.
I mean, the Tennessee one seems easy.
Sure, but I mean, like we've done the No King stuff. These are like the largest protests in U.S. history. But then like, what are we getting?
Well, okay, well then, if not to protest, what is your solution then?
Don't worry about it. I don't know. The I mean, you need clear, actionable things from the Democrats. Like, what are some asks that we're actually trying to get to make things better? But the thing is that Republicans have so much behind them in terms of like, what is our legislative strategy to, do the things that we want across the United States? And Democrats just don't really have that behind the scenes. And then we can't communicate any of it to the voters because the Democrats can't message on anything because of their lack of media presence. So you've got the far left that's just screeching about everything being the same. You've got the Democrats screeching about literally, or I'm sorry, the Republicans screeching about whatever the fuck they want while they're getting all of their changes passed because the American citizens gave them the power to basically everything. And then you're just like, fucked. The Minnesota protests worked. Dems in red states should absolutely protest the gerrymandering. Well, the Minnesota protests worked because that was a simple thing and a simple ask, right? You have ICE citizens killing, or you have ICE officers killing U.S. citizens, and they want them to fucking leave, right?
I mean, I think the Memphis one could be pretty simple.
For the crazy
we don't want
gerrymander?
Memphis. Yeah, we don't want Memphis split up into 3 districts. Like, that is a simple ask. I think Dems need to get together and start figuring out what are simple asks and simple wins that we can start getting, and then
to fight against the gerrymander. Yeah, I mean that's yeah. To undo
Memphis
it,
shouldn't
maybe
be split up into 3. Like that is a simple ask. That is something you can protest on.
A shrimp lies. Potentially.
Even shrimple.
%.
I'm surprised that cities can be split up in a gerrymander. That seems kind of retarded to me. Why not? Well, usually when you're drawing maps, I would assume you're trying to do it because you want to incorporate like different... like you want to incorporate like the same type of people within like the same map so they get like similar representation, etc. And splitting up a city feels semi-retarded. Do I want a huge city to be 1 district? Yes. You don't want 3 million people in a city to have 1 rep. You need to split it up. Yeah, I guess that does make sense, huh? Oh, he just walked away. Have I seen the drama? Yeah, I watched it last night. I got a bit of a hot take. I think the movie wasn't very good. I think it was fine. But at the end of the day, I don't think the movie like really, I don't know, accomplished much. Not accomplished much. I don't know. It just, I don't know. It wasn't for me. I didn't watch it with Chad. I just watched it alone. So maybe it would have been more fun if I watched it with DGG.
What's the drama about?
Do you want the spoiler?
You can't even tell me what it's about without the spoiler?
Sure. It's a movie about a couple who are getting married, and then a big piece of a controversial thing gets dropped where they talk to each other and they're like, "Oh, what's like the worst thing you've ever done?" And then
Glamley, thanks for the points and subs in Kick Chat.
Information is what the whole movie's about.
Okay.
Yeah.
When is that controversial thing dropped? At the beginning of the movie?
First 30 minutes, first 20 minutes. The movie is about the controversial thing. Yeah.
So how is that a spoiler?
Well, the controversial thing is a spoiler to the entire movie.
Okay. Bitch. Just kidding, sorry.
I'd give it a 3 out of 5.
Wow.
Nothing groundbreaking. Decent watch. Wouldn't rewatch.
All right, what is this? They're wrong about SCOTUS gutting the VRA.
People are talking about the latest Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act incorrectly. The Voting Rights Act was not gutted. And some people may say that this is just my pedantry talking, and it totally is, but there's a purpose to it. I think it's important that we understand exactly what happened here, because that is what is going to allow us to recognize where the problem actually lies and how we actually fix it. The largest vulnerability in our system is not the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is actually just a very effective tool by which existing vulnerabilities are being exploited. And I've talked about this before, but one of the biggest things that I think we suffer from right now is this misattribution problem. And if you're unfamiliar, earlier this week, SCOTUS issued a new opinion on racially discriminatory gerrymandering, essentially allowing it. But that's not exactly what happened. The way people are framing this is that the Voting Rights Act was gutted, that essentially SCOTUS invalidated a whole section of the Voting Rights Act, which is something they have actually done before. But that's not actually what happened here. And while some people may say, well, what's the difference if the result is the same? If we recognize that the actual vulnerabilities lie in our legal code itself, then the solutions are going to be actually much more attainable and effective. By the way, this is an issue that RBG warned about for decades, and it drives me up a wall seeing how liberals, both justices and legislators, etc., don't seem to recognize this issue for what it is. And I need you to listen carefully when I say this. While I agree with the liberal justices on their read and reasoning in just about every decision, I also understand the logic that is being used by the right to exploit these vulnerabilities. And my pedantry doesn't allow me to disagree with a lot of it based on the technicalities of the law, even if I disagree with it morally. But that's specifically because that's how my brain works. I am very good at finding technicalities. And I say this all as a disclaimer because I don't want it to sound like I'm arguing from a position that I'm not. So on to Calais and SCOTUS's ruling. The case is about a Louisiana district map. Louisiana currently has 6 congressional districts, meaning 6 seats in the House. And this fight was basically over 2 versions of a district map. One which would have left 4 seats presumed to be held by Republicans and 2 by Democrats, and the other which would have left 5 seats presumed to be held by Republicans and 1 by Democrats. The problem is the new map didn't just result in partisan redistribution, it also resulted in racial redistribution. In other words, the 2 majority Democrat districts were also 2 majority Black districts, and that's not a coincidence. And while the Voting Rights Act prevents racial discrimination in questions of voting, but also in districting, the courts have basically decided that in districting, it has to be purposefully racially discriminatory. So like on purpose discriminating against a specific minority group on the basis of race. And if a map does, and that's not a coincidence. And while the Voting Rights Act prevents racial discrimination in questions of voting, but also in districting, the courts have basically decided that in districting, it has to be purposefully racially discriminatory. So like on purpose discriminating against a specific minority group on the basis of race. And if a map does happen to end up being racially discriminatory, the Voting Rights Act does not force a state to redraw districts based on race, because that would also actually be racial gerrymandering. So basically on the
She's explaining what the current court is saying, but this isn't how we've understood it for the last 40 years, though.
The question of districting specifically, the VRA will stop a state from purposefully racially gerrymandering, but that's about it. What complicates this and essentially renders this part of the VRA kind of moot is the reason for which people racially gerrymander. And that is, of course, partisanship. While originally racial gerrymandering may have only been about disenfranchising minority voters, the fact is Republicans are more than happy to enfranchise or empower minority voters if they think that those minority voters are going to vote Republican. The big reason why they currently disenfranchise Black voters through gerrymandering is because Black voters are pretty reliably Democratic voters. That's not to say that there isn't also a specifically racial purpose to the disenfranchisement. Obviously there is, but in comparison, for example, you can see what they just did in Texas, which also recently had a case about its new maps and the question of partisan versus racial gerrymandering. In that case, they had actually drawn a new map with a bunch of new Hispanic majority districts, specifically because they were relying on the Latino voters to vote Republican. Now, of course, ironically, they may have dummy-mandered their way out of the benefits to this new map. In other words, they may have gerrymandered a little too close to the sun by assuming that Hispanic voters would still be on their side by the time midterms rolled around. But the point is, they use racial gerrymandering as a shortcut to their partisan gerrymandering. And ironically, in Texas, they wanted to hide that it was partisan gerrymandering, so they were advertising and claiming that it was just racial gerrymandering, because they knew that in Texas people would be upset if they heard it was in fact partisan gerrymandering. And now they're making the opposite argument in Louisiana, saying, no, it's not racial gerrymandering, it's partisan gerrymandering. It's all just based on political power. And if that is in fact the case, if it is true that the districts in question were drawn primarily in pursuit of another goal that isn't just simply discriminating against a specific group or minority, it's technically okay, even if it results in a minority's disenfranchisement. I know what you're gonna say. Well, what does it matter? Right? The result is the same. Minority voters, Democrat voters, they are being discriminated against. And you're right, especially in practice, especially in this case. But the reason it matters is because they didn't gut the VRA in the traditional sense of saying, well, the VRA can't actually protect against racial discrimination in gerrymandering. That part still stands, which is important, even if there is a very easy way to get around it now. And the only reason it can be gotten around is because there is not a prohibition against partisan gerrymandering, which could in fact be law. And if partisan gerrymandering was in fact made illegal, racial gerrymandering would still be illegal. And there would be no easy way around either of those things by claiming you...
Okay, the big issue I think that she's not addressing at all, I don't know if she's a lawyer or what her thing is. I think that if Congress passes a law, right? So this had to do with Kagan talks about this concept like statutory stare decisis, right? If Congress passes a law and then cases start to be litigated in accordance with the law, everybody's kind of happy. And then a few cases happen and Congress and the country are like, we don't like how these cases are going. We're going to amend the law to make it even stronger in this direction in a very obvious way. Like, we said that we have this Voting Rights Act to protect racial minorities, but we notice that people are being kind of clever in how they're getting around the law. So we're going to amend part of this law to make it stronger to protect against that. And then for the next 40 years or 37 years, the Supreme Court goes, yeah, we understand what you're doing. That's fine. That's great. You have this combination of like law passed by Congress, Supreme Court decisions, the law, reaffirmed and strengthened based on language that came from a Supreme Court decision. And then the Supreme Court agreeing with the new construction of that law for 37 years and interpreting it as such. To just walk back on a dime with that is crazy. That's just insane to me. I understand she's saying here, well, we could just ban partisan gerrymandering. I don't even know if you can. Can it, like, constitutionally, I don't know if, like, partisanship, like, political parties are, like, a protected class. Could the federal government ban a state from drawing a map that favors a partisan balance? I don't know if they could do that. I'm not sure. I have no idea. I don't know.
Would still be illegal, and there would be no easy way around either of those things by claiming you were doing the other, in other words. And this is the crux of the issue, the misattribution that I keep seeing crop up on so many different things. The Supreme Court and conservatives in particular are playing by Air Bud rules. Time and time again, the conclusions that they're reaching are, well, technically, there's no rule against it, so I guess it's allowed. Which means that the way to fix that issue isn't just get a different judge that might agree with you that, oh, just because there isn't a rule against it doesn't mean it isn't crazy, but rather to change the rule itself. We have to stop.
I don't like, and I could be wrong. I fully admit I could be wrong. Oh, this person's probably way smarter than me when it comes to legal stuff. I just don't like this idea of like, we just need to make more rules because like we had a rule. We all understood what this rule was 37 years old. The Supreme Court agreed with the rule. Multiple courts agreed with the rule. The Congress agreed with the rule. The United States agreed with the rule. You had the courts and the Congress speaking uniformly and reaffirming constantly and consistently how this rule was applied. And then a guy comes along and is like, nah. Like, Are we supposed to pass a new rule every single time the Supreme Court God whispers, a different interpretation of the one that we all understood to be, to be in existence? I don't know.
Relying on the interpretation of the laws being done in good faith by the executive, by the Supreme Court, and instead focus on writing better laws. There is a reason Democrats have tried multiple times, especially in recent years, to pass legislation that would have banned partisan gerrymandering, complete with a whole structure involving nonpartisan committees, etc. They were trying to plug this hole that was never actually plugged or blocked by the Voting Rights Act. And in fact, SCOTUS has ruled in similar ways for decades. Now, obviously, yes, SCOTUS has thrown out parts of the Voting Rights Act before, but it has also been unable to throw out other parts. In fact, in a Supreme Court case from 2019, they said as much in Rucho v. Common Cause.
Kaiser says, Destiny, no, but we should require Congress to clarify the rule in law so that the Supreme Court can't interpret it in a way that is counter to what it's meant to achieve. I agree with you, but that's what happened here. The Voting Rights Act existed. There was a Supreme Court decision that seemed to show that you could, in effect, discriminate against people. That was fine. And then the Congress didn't like that. The American people didn't like that. And they're like, well, hold on, that's bullshit. So we're going to change the wording of Section 2 to say that you need to look at the totality of the circumstances to see the effect rather than the intent. And they even added clarifying language saying, this doesn't mean that just because there's like 20% black people, that 20% of their representatives have to be black, right? We're not saying it has to be 1-to-1 like this, but the minority vote should be respected and can't always be swamped by the majority vote. So the Congress lifted language from a Supreme Court decision that they didn't like to amend the law so that it would come into alignment with how the Supreme Court viewed it and how the Congress and American people viewed it. And so we had that marriage of our interpretation of this law for 37 years. And now the new Congress is like, nah. Now they're like, fuck it. So like, who's to say we don't pass another law that... I don't know. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm legally retarded. I don't know, man. I feel like the Supreme Court is just not... I'm starting to wonder. I'm starting to wonder, man. There was a... Fuck, what was the game I played? Triangle Strategy? Like, one of the last battles keeps popping into my fucking head. There's like, fuck. There's just like some guy who like whispers into like some cloaked thing where, I don't know, the child god or whatever bullshit is. And it's like, well, obviously he whispers to him and then he figures out what this guy wants and nobody can really say that he's wrong because he's the one who's like whispering to the whatever mythical figure. And I don't know, it just feels like the Supreme Court has been running amok a little bit too much with that. Like, we are, you can't look at the Constitution, only we can, and we'll tell you exactly how it works. And we might disagree with ourselves, randomly and arbitrarily every few decades, because why the fuck not? It says that law sucks shit. But you said, for the past 40 years, you said the law was good. Nope, that's not, it doesn't matter. It says the law is shit now. It says the law is shit now. Fuck you. And it's like, well, damn, I don't know. It's kind of crazy to me that the Supreme Court is the only one with access to the Constitution. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's reasons. I don't know. It's just crazy to me. Whatever. I don't know. Whatever.
In that case, SCOTUS was asked to weigh in on the discriminatory nature of partisan gerrymandering. And they basically were like, this question is too political for it to be judicial, for us to weigh in on it, and basically laid out some frameworks by which SCOTUS can make non-political rulings on questions of a political nature. Like, you need certain rules that you can just measure things in a nonpartisan way. And in fact, in the court's opinion, which was a conservative majority opinion, they talk about how the framers gave Congress the power to do something about partisan gerrymandering in the Elections Clause, even listing a few examples of legislation that had both been passed and proposed at that point. So essentially, they have been saying over and over again, like, this is something that Congress can pass laws about. Congress has the ability to pass laws about this. We technically conveniently, can't rule on things like partisan gerrymandering unless there's a law for us to rule based off of. And like I said at the beginning, while I disagree with this opinion on a moral ground, logically and legally, unfortunately, it holds. And while I agree with the liberal justices on just about everything, this is just another situation where it appears to me the left...
Like, I don't understand how you can't view this as undermining the courts. I'm not trying to be a stare decisis slut or whatever, but it can't just be that a new court could just have a completely different statutory interpretation of a law that the courts and the Congress have decided mean a certain thing for decades. It can't be that way. That's just crazy to me. I just feel like nothing could possibly undermine your court more than that. That's just crazy to me. I don't know, man. It wasn't fucking, who wrote the concurrence in this? Was it Gorsuch? I felt like, was Gorsuch the one who wrote the stare decisis concurrence in the, is it Loper? The one that overturned Chevron? I appreciated his writing there. I thought he made a really good argument for it. I'm in favor, I think, kind of. I think they made a strong argument for overturning Chevron in my limited legalese, whatever the fuck. And I appreciated his, the concept of stare decisis that he laid out there and why he thought it was appropriate for the court to overturn it or whatever. I appreciated that. But, god damn. Every day, whenever I say those words in chat, I don't know, I just feel like I have to remind people, like, originalism and textualism and all this bullshit, they don't fucking mean anything. If you've got justices who are willing to just, like, ignore, right? Part of your decision-making is like a history of judicial wisdom. In times of normalcy across many different courts, you look back to what prior judges have thought about a thing, and in your opinion, is informed by a lot of their analysis. And to just have the audacity to look back at prior courts and say, fuck it. You know what? I think they all got this wrong. Let's go here. And then to lie about it, like Alito does, he's like, I don't actually think any of the prior courts addressed Section 2. And then it's funny that Kagan is like, you should just go search the case and Control F and look. And I did. I was like, oh, actually, it seems like they talk about Section 2 a great deal in this case. I don't know why Alito says that so many times. They don't ever even touch the Section 2 thing. And it's like, I don't know, it seems like it was pretty central to the decision. Roberts writes literally the exact opposite opinion about a lot of these things that you do. I don't know. I just don't. I don't know. I don't know.
Just about everything. This is just another situation where it appears to me...
I think Thomas wrote the concurrence on Callis. Oh, maybe, I don't know. All right.
Liberal justices on just about everything. This is just another situation where it appears to me the left is relying a little too heavily on good faith interpretation and good faith application of the law on...
But, like... If you... I'm so sorry. Fuck. I wish I knew what this lady's background was. It cannot possibly be that you can ever have judges, that your judicial branch can survive bad faith, when literally the entire purpose of a judge rests upon their interpretation of law. That's the whole purpose of being a judge. Their interpretations are so absolute. That was what they overturned Chevron on, was the idea that there can't be multiple permissible understandings of a congressional law. There can't be multiple statutory constructions. There is only one proper way to construe a congressional statute, and that is in the purview of the Supreme Court, where the only people that can ever interpret it, or I guess they can interpret it multiple times now, apparently, but like, to look at a judge and say, well, I don't really need a good faith judge. I just need to make sure he's adhering to all the law. It's a judge. The whole purpose of being a judge is interpretation. How could a judicial branch survive bad faith actors? I have no idea. I don't know. I just don't know how that's even possible. I can understand maybe the Congress, maybe the president, although we have that whole constitutional crisis thing, because the idea of a bad faith president is pretty hard to survive. But like, a bad faith judge?
The left is relying a little too heavily on good faith interpretation and good faith application of the law on a moral basis. They just don't seem to have the same degree of Air Bud imagination that conservatives do. And that's a problem. Now, obviously, specifically in regards to this, like I said, Democrats have actually been trying to pass anti-gerrymandering.
And sometimes I think the liberal judges can write goofy stuff. Like, if I remember, it might have even been Kagan, or it might have been Sotomayor, or it might have been Brown who wrote the dissent. I just named every liberal judge in that Loper case. And I feel like her dissent was basically like, well, the Supreme Court can't do statutory interpretation because the laws are too complicated, LOL. I thought the dissent there was super weak. And I was like, I think that was the main reason why I was in favor of it. I was like, yeah, fuck it. This dissent sucks. But in this case, Kagan is not just waffling about, like, I don't know, the moral question is hard. I think she gives a really good rationale for why the law has been interpreted the way that it has for 37 years. I think she gives a good idea of how you had a law, the Supreme Court was interpreting it in a way Congress didn't like, and Congress literally amended the law, and then that's been our dual understanding for decades. And I feel like she's kind of hand-waving a lot of that by going like, oh, the liberals are just kind of being emotional. It's like, well, no. I feel like this is the strongest form of judicial, I don't know, statutory interpretation and construction is when you have the Supreme Court and the Congress coming together and then crafting a law that's been understood to be a certain way for decades. To hand wave all that away is them being emotional, I think is a little silly, but I don't know.
See, specifically in regards to this, like I said, Democrats have actually been trying to pass anti-gerrymandering legislation, which would have basically plugged that Airbud rule. But I'm just trying to illustrate this larger problem, right? Where these vulnerabilities actually are. And it's the same issue that we were running up against and still are with everything that Trump attempts to do. Time and time again, when he has won, and he hasn't always won, but when he has won, it has been based on Airbud rules. Technically, there's no law against it. So technically, as the executive, he can do it that way if he wants. We need better laws, which means we need better legislators, which is why I think it's important to talk about correctly. Our problems don't stem from a group of 9 people that most everyday citizens have absolutely no power to remove. No, our problems stem from the people we...
Maybe you're hitting a little bit too close to home there for me. Maybe that might be why a problem.
Very, very much have the power to remove. Not that it's easy, okay? But at least it's a little bit less defeatist. And you know how I feel about defeatism.
I don't know. What's this show?
It's here. Today we got the Supreme Court's decision in Louisiana versus Calais, the case about the future of the Voting Rights Act.
Okay, wait, hold on. Okay, I've eaten enough. I can finish this, I think. Ugh. Calais LeMayo. Get it? Get it, LeMayo? Get it, LeMayo? Okay. We have like 9 pages left. We can do this. And if those decisions are too ancient for today's majority, it should consider again Allen from 3 terms ago. There, Alabama made an argument, similar to the majority's, that the effects-based framework of Section 2 and Gingell's too far strayed from the 15th Amendment's ban on intentional discrimination. We stomped on that objection. The prior decisions of this court, we stated, foreclose any argument that Congress may not, pursuant to Section 2 of the 15th Amendment, outlaw voting practices that are discriminatory in effect. For the opinion of Kavanaugh, the constitutional argument presented by Alabama is not persuasive in light of the court's precedents. Section 2's ban on electoral changes that are discriminatory in effect, we continued, is an appropriate method of promoting the purposes of the 15th Amendment. And if that were not enough, one final way of driving home the point, we are not persuaded by the view that the effects test of Section 2, as interpreted in Gingell's, exceeds the remedial authority of Congress. Those well-established precepts permit Congress to do what Congress did when it amended Section 2, prohibit electoral schemes based on their vote diluting effects, regardless of whether a state could offer up some race-neutral explanation. Congress then knew that it possessed such enforcement power, our decisions settling the issue were landmarks of the civil rights era, and Congress decided to use its authority. It did not make asserted state interests irrelevant. Those interests indeed had to be considered in the totality of circumstances inquiry Congress prescribed. But neither did Congress make those interests a nearly impregnable shield as the majority does today. It understood, just as the court had, that even race-neutral actions could perpetuate purposeful racial discrimination, and it realized, again, in the same vein as the court, that race-neutral explanations could conceal race-based intent. Today's majority makes plain its disdain for those views. But the 15th Amendment gave the power to enforce its guarantees not to this court, but to Congress. So the majority moves on again, now to a grab bag of developments that it somehow thinks license it to rewrite a statute. The majority first summons the slogan of Shelby County, in which the court ordained itself the arbiter of when civil rights laws are no longer needed. Things have changed dramatically, today's majority echoes, pointing to increases in African American voting registration and to the success of African Americans at attaining political office, particularly in the South where many Section 2 suits arise. No doubt that is so, in large measure because of the Voting Rights Act. But it is a separate question whether those gains will endure once the Act's protections are gone. Ginsburg dissenting, noting the fallacy of throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. And surely, but apparently not, the proper actor to answer that question is Congress. For one thing, it likely has a fuller understanding of the issue. I will be interested to see, for example, whether time will vindicate the majority's view that the great strides made in African American office holding, particularly in the South, will hold up after the issuance of this opinion. My own guess is not. But honestly, the American people pay no member of this court to make those predictive policy judgments, and more important, the Constitution does not allow us to base our decisions on them. It is for the people's representatives in Congress to decide when the nation need no longer worry about the dilution of minority voting strength. So long as Congress has not done so, and it has not, this court has no right to update a duly enacted statute on the theory that it knows better. Indeed, the majority's things have changed stance here is yet less defensible than in Shelby County. That is because Section 2, unlike the now defunct Section 5, itself responds to change, so no external fix is needed. Section 5 selected jurisdictions for preclearance based on past conditions, so if the provision's last authorization was many years in the past, the mechanism could appear outdated. And quoting Shelby County, coverage today is based on decades-old data and eradicated practices. Section 2, by contrast, does not run on historical data. Liability attaches based only on present electoral practices and the present discrimination they result in. A plaintiff must prove that the political process is not equally open to participation by all citizens at the time of suit. If he cannot, he loses. There is thus no danger, as Shelby County put it, that current burdens are not justified by current needs. Under Section 2, they must be. The Gingell's preconditions yet further anchor Section 2 suits in the here and now by working as built-in sunset clauses. The first precondition is met only if a racial group is, in the present, geographically concentrated. That means as residential segregation decreases in a state, Section 2 becomes unavailable as a remedy. Similarly, the second and third preconditions can be satisfied only if voting is racially polarized. So as racial block voting recedes, Section 2 ceases to operate. And racial desegregation and depolarization are not just possible in theory, they are happening in fact and at speed in many parts of the country. Consistent with those trends, the number of successful Section 2 vote dilution suits, always fairly small, has declined every decade since the statute was amended. In short, as things change dramatically, Section 2 self-liquidates, and to a fair extent it already has. But in the places where, because of local conditions, the law continues to work, the court has no warrant to speed its demise. Conductor screen. Oh, shit, sorry. The fuck? I actually pre-read the whole decision, so I actually had it all memorized. So I was going from memory, sorry. Nor is the majority aided by what it terms the emergence of a full-blown two-party system in the states where Section 2 suits are most common. As to that development, the majority reiterates its persistent theme. When racially polarized voting expresses itself in different party preferences, district lines may reflect partisan rather than racial motives, and so Section 2 should drop out of the picture. But as an initial matter, the majority's newly formulated test will eliminate the lion's share of Section 2 claims even when racially polarized voting occurs within a single party, as in the Solicitor General's Harlem example discussed above. The state could not then assert a partisan gerrymandering defense, but it could invoke a host of other race-neutral justifications, like incumbency protection or district continuity to ward off liability. In short, the majority's test fails to save Section 2, even for the intra-party racial disparities that the majority asserts Congress had in mind. And, more fundamentally, the majority is wrong on its history. By 1982, the year of Section 2's amendment, Congress well knew that race is often correlated with party preference, because that was increasingly the case. Senate hearings were replete with testimony about that growing correlation, with opponents of the House's results in language, Senator Hatch and his camp, questioning witnesses about why minority groups alone should be immune to partisan or ideological gerrymandering. But those proponents of Bolden, of course, did not get their way. The Dole proposal maintained the House's emphasis on results, not motives. So the majority's appeal to an old one-party system, like the rest of its insistence on disentangling partisanship and race, works not to uphold, but instead to overthrow the bargain Congress made. The last argument about post-Gingell's developments, worth mentioning, is also the most dispiriting. 7 years ago, this court held in Rucho v. Common Cause that claims of political gerrymandering are not justiciable in federal court. That was, in my view, an ill-considered decision whose adverse effects have never been more obvious than today, as this country's two major parties compete in a race to the bottom. But to its modest credit, the Rucho court did not pretend that partisan gerrymanders were something in need of safeguarding. To the contrary, the court conceded that they were incompatible with democratic principles and led to results that reasonably seem unjust. The court's rationale was only that federal courts lack competence to deal with gerrymanders, not that they were protected by law or beneficial as policy. Today, though, the majority straight-facedly holds that the Voting Rights Act must be brought low to make the world safe for partisan gerrymanders. For how else, the majority reasons, can we preserve the authority of states to engage in this practice than by stripping minority citizens of their rights to an equal political process? And with that, the majority, as much as invites states to embark on a new round of partisan gerrymanders and makes an already bad precedent into one still worse. It is not enough that Rucho has harmed the whole body politic. Now, that decision also becomes the cudgel to diminish the rightful voting influence of its minority citizens. Congress amended Section 2 to reverse the court's decision in Bolden that the law barred only intentional racial discrimination in voting. Based on a century of history, Congress determined that such a limited ban would not be enough to protect minority citizens' voting rights. The legislation Congress enacted to correct Bolden emerged from vigorous debate and careful compromise, based mainly on this court's decision in White. The new law denied a right to proportional representation. It focused instead on the opportunity that a given election practice granted minority citizens. But the requisite opportunity was not to be assessed by a state's intent or by its proffered justifications. Rather, the lawfulness of an election practice was to turn on its results on whether it gave minority citizens a lesser chance than their majority neighbors to participate in politics and elect candidates. And making that choice, Congress exercised its constitutional responsibility to enforce the 15th Amendment, and when called on to interpret the new law, this court, from Gingell's all the way through Allen, respected and implemented what Congress had done. Today's majority does not. Its supposed updating of Gingell's overthrows Congress's decision to make Section 2 liability hinge on an electoral practice's effects on how it actually works. The new CALA requirements will effectively insulate any practice, including any districting scheme, said by a state to have any race-neutral justification. That justification can sound in traditional districting criteria, or else can sound in politics and partisanship. As to the latter, the state need do nothing more than announce a partisan gerrymander. Assuming the state has left behind no smoking gun evidence of a race-based motive, an almost fanciful prospect, Section 2 will play no role. Whatever justification results, whatever results from the state's asserted justification is all its minority citizens are entitled to. Even if the state has deprived those citizens, but not their majority neighbors, of all opportunity to elect representatives of their choice, the law will not protect them. It is Bolden redux, despite Congress's repudiation of that decision and this court's precedents honoring that rejection. The majority has made its own assessments of current needs and concluded that preventing racial vote dilution does not count among them. So once again, in the absence of proof of intentional discrimination, the right to vote gives minority citizens nothing more than the right to cast meaningless ballots. The consequences are likely to be far-reaching and grave. Today's decision renders Section 2 all but a dead letter. In the states where the law continues to matter, the states still marked by residential segregation and racially polarized voting, minority voters can now be cracked out of the electoral process. The decision here is about Louisiana's District 6, but so too is it about Louisiana's District 2. And so too is it about the many other districts, particularly in the South, that in the last half-century have given minority citizens, and particularly African Americans, a meaningful political voice. After today, those districts exist only on sufferance, and probably not for long. If other states follow Louisiana's lead, the minority citizens residing there will no longer have an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice, and minority representation in government institutions will sharply decline. At the first stage of this judicial project to destroy the Voting Rights Act, the court maintained that Section 5 was no longer needed because in recent decades, African Americans attained political office in record numbers. At this last stage, the court's gutting of Section 2 puts that achievement in peril. I dissent because Congress elected otherwise. I dissent because the court betrays its duty to faithfully implement the great statute Congress wrote. I dissent because the court's decision will set back the foundational right Congress granted of racial equality in electoral opportunity. I dissent. Wow. Drama queen.
Protections against racial discrimination in redistricting. Spoiler alert, that future is over. It's just about as bad as expected. It was, after all, written by Sam Alito. We're going to quickly walk through the implications and potential fallout of the case with help from Mark Elias, chair of Elias Law Group. And
hold on. I got to see this meme first. Hold on.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to FedSoc Forums. My name is Libby Dickinson, and I'm an Associate Director with the Federalist Society's practice groups. As a reminder, all opinions expressed are those of our speakers and not of the Federalist Society. Today's Courthouse Steps program will be a discussion of yesterday's 6-3 decision in Louisiana v. Calais, with the court's opinion written by Justice Samuel Alito. Joining us to discuss this monumental decision, we have Mr. Bradley Benbrook, Managing Partner at the Benbrook Law Group, and Professor Mike Domino of Widener University Commonwealth Law School, who coincidentally just published a new book, Understanding Election Law, and has an upcoming case law book, Voting Rights and Election Law. If our audience has any questions throughout the webinar that pertain to the topic at hand, please submit them through Zoom's Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen and not the chat, so we'll be able to access them later on. With that note, I will turn things over to our speakers to start today's conversation. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Libby. It's my great pleasure to be here with Professor Domino to talk about Calais. Mike, when we did our Courthouse Steps program on this case 6 months ago, we said it could be a blockbuster, and it didn't disappoint. I'd like to start by setting up the landscape for our listeners who aren't election law nerds. Calais is important because it resolved a question that the Supreme Court had avoided for 30 years.
I'm not going to read Allen or White, but okay.
The problem traces back to the compromise in the 1982 amendments to the Voting Rights Act and the major Jingles decision from 1986.
Wait, fuck, is it Jingles? I thought we read something, or I thought we listened to somebody pronounce it was Gingles. Is it Jingles? Fuck!
The test for proving a Section 2 violation when it comes to drawing district lines. And the problem over the years would play out as follows. After each census since at least 1990, when it came time to redistrict, states would say, okay, we have to create some number of majority-minority districts in order to avoid a claim that we are violating Section 2. And on the one hand, even after creating these set-aside districts, the VRA, litigation industrial complex, would say that's not enough. You have to draw more majority-minority districts. And as computer models became more sophisticated, it became easier to create all kinds of different districts for whatever reasons, including race. On the other hand, opponents would say these race-based districts that are being drawn are racial gerrymanders. You are considering race in drawing district lines without any finding that the state discriminated on race. So that violates the 14th Amendment. And this dynamic set up what has been referred to as the tension between the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment. And the Supreme Court had avoided that question over and over by saying, we're going to assume for the sake of deciding this case that compliance with the Voting Rights Act is a compelling interest that justifies considering race and drawing district lines.
How is it not?
Yet sometimes it would also basically say, but don't be blatant about it. Don't draw districts that string together minority communities that are really far apart. And if you go overboard, you violate the 14th Amendment. Needless to say, this state of the law didn't result in much clarity, and the litigation continued.
Crazy that it didn't result in much clarity, but for 37 years, we all seem to have an understanding of what it meant, though. But I'm sure, because these guys are good legal professors, we're going to get examples of like how this was abused or horrible dog shit cases, I guess, maybe.
Which brings us to Calais. Calais demonstrated how out of control Section 2 litigation had become. Until the 2020 reapportionment, Louisiana had always had 7 congressional seats and never had more than 1 majority-minority districts. And keep in mind, Louisiana had to get its districts pre-cleared by the Department of Justice in 1980, 1990, 2000, and the Clinton and Obama Department of Justice never said, hey, you're violating the Voting Rights Act by having only 1 majority-minority district. Yet, in 2025, with only 6 seats now instead of 7, a district court in Louisiana said Section 2 required that Louisiana, for the first time, must have 2 majority-minority districts.
We didn't. It was abused for decades, dude. How does it make sense to say that a law was abused for decades if the Supreme Court upheld it and the Congress didn't change it? Abused as to whose opinion? Your own personal opinion?
Louisiana, a district court in Louisiana said Section 2 required that Louisiana, for the first time, must have 2 majority-minority districts. How can this possibly be? How can it possibly make sense 60 years after the Voting Rights Act was passed? So Justice Alito says in the opening paragraph of Calais, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act was designed to enforce the Constitution, not collide with it. Unfortunately, lower courts have sometimes applied this court's Section 2 precedents in a way that forces states to engage in the very race-based discrimination that the Constitution forbids. As a result, he said, compliance with Section 2 as properly construed, which he emphasized, can justify race-based districting, but correctly understood, he said, Section 2 does not impose liability at odds with the Constitution, and it should not have imposed liability on Louisiana for failing to have a second majority-minority district here. So, Mike, can you summarize, please, for our listeners, how Justice Alito explained there was no tension as to Section 2 when it is properly construed?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks to you and the Federalist Society for hosting this and for having me.
Also, thanks for the clarification there. I didn't know that laws couldn't collide with the Constitution. Like, very meaningful dialogue and writing there. Oh, the law can't violate the Constitution? Oh, shit, really? The law is properly because you can't violate the Constitution? If I was in a law class, could I pad my writing with, like, retarded shit like that? Like, the President of the United States, by the way, the President is the Commander-in-Chief. That means he's the leader of the Army. The President of the United, like, are you just allowed to, like, put, like, random shit like this to pad your shit? Like, thank you. Yes.
Here, I agree with you that Calais is a tremendously important decision, mostly because of the way that Justice Alito reinterprets Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, for those of you who are not aware that Calais is a tremendously important decision, mostly because of the way that Justice Alito reinterprets Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, for those of you who are not terribly familiar...
I thought this guy over here just said that he's not reinterpreting it. He's interpreting it for the first time because all the prior courts had just never touched what Section 2 ever meant.
Familiar with the Act as a whole. Remember that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act applied only to covered jurisdictions, particular areas with a history of discrimination, mostly in the South. But Section 2, the part of the Voting Rights Act that was at issue in this case, applied nationwide. And so the redistricting rules that were imposed on the country by Section 2 applied to every jurisdiction, whether or not there was a history of racial discrimination in voting. I think it's fair to say the prevailing interpretation of Section 2 prior to this case was that the Voting Rights Act created what amounted to an entitlement to rough proportionality in districting for minority groups. That is, that minority groups would be entitled under the VRA to to control over a number of legislative seats proportionate to the minority group's share of the population. So in Louisiana, in this case, was interpretation of Section 2 prior to this case, of racial discrimination in voting. I think it's fair to say the prevailing interpretation of Section 2 prior to this case was that the Voting Rights Act created what amounted to an entitlement to rough proportionality in districting for minority groups. That is, that minority groups would be entitled under the VRA to to control over a number of legislative seats proportionate to the minority group's share of the population. So in Louisiana, if Black voters were roughly 1/6 of the population, then they would be presumptively entitled to 1/6 of the legislative seats. But if they had closer to 2/6 of the population in Louisiana, which was closer to the numbers that are actually true, that they would presumptively be entitled to 2 of those 6 legislative seats, so long as a district that the court said was reasonably compact could be drawn such as to give the minority group control over that number of seats. That is, you're creating a sufficient number of majority-minority districts so that the minority group had a roughly proportional control over the district.
And I would interject, this rough understanding applied, notwithstanding that the text of the Section 2 expressly says nothing in here entitles minority groups to proportionate representation.
That's right. It was a quite remarkable interpretation of the act. And even the court in this case says, well, Jingles, which interpreted the statute in this kind of curious way, dates from the era when we didn't really do statutory interpretation the right way. We didn't pay enough attention to statutory language. We kind of cited legislative history and then did whatever we wanted. It's a pretty overt reference to the kind of bad old days of statutory interpretation. The lead opinion in Jingles, as one might suspect, is written by Justice Brennan, who interpreted Section 2 very broadly. So I'd like to describe his interpretation a bit and then talk about how Justice Alito reinterprets Section 2 in a way that significantly departs from the understanding of Justice Brennan's plurality opinion in that case.
Sounds good.
What Justice Brennan said is that a minority group who's seeking to raise a Section 2 challenge should have to satisfy 4 things. So the 3, what Brennan called preconditions, 3 preconditions, and then a totality of the circumstances test. So precondition number one was that the minority group has to be sufficiently large and geographically compact to be able to constitute a majority in a single member district. So if you're not large enough, if you're spread out too much so that we can't draw a majority-minority district, then the state's failure to draw one doesn't violate the Voting Rights Act. Precondition number 2 was that the minority group must show that it is politically cohesive, that it has preferred candidates, that the minority group members have sufficiently similar political preferences, that the group as a whole has preferred candidates. The third condition was that the white majority, referred to as the white majority, must vote sufficiently as a bloc to be able to defeat the minority group's preferred candidate. And then the minority group must also show that when you consider the totality of the circumstances, that minority groups must be deprived of an equal opportunity to participate in the political process and in particular to elect representatives of their choice. What this amounted to in practice was that if the minority group was big enough so that the share of the population was enough to correspond to at least one of the legislative districts that were being created, that the minority group would basically be entitled to a proportionate share of legislative seats. The totality of the circumstances test at the end basically meant, although the court never quite said this, it basically meant that that if the minority group was being denied roughly proportional representation, that amounted to a denial of an equal opportunity to elect representatives of the group's choice. So what Justice Alito says is that
he's sneaking us in a little bit here. He's saying roughly proportionate representation, but the other factors are important. If your state is 90% white and 10% black, but the black people are all evenly dispersed throughout the state, then you can't create a contiguous compact district that encompasses just those voters. So you would fail on that right there in the old Jingles framework. So he keeps saying proportionate, but that's not strictly true. The other factors do matter. He did say that, but they keep saying this.
That Section 2 does not create and was not supposed to create, in fact, as you pointed out, explicitly says it is not creating a right to proportional representation. So even though that's the way the court interpretations seem to have gone, that's not what the statute says. That's not what the statute originally meant.
I don't agree with that, but.
And so the bottom line of this case is that we return the understanding of Section 2 of the Act to an understanding pretty close to what it says and what it should have meant for close to the last 45 years.
Says who? Says you? Says Alito? Because like it stands in contradiction to our past 40 years of jurisprudence, no?
So how does Alito do this? In the first place, he says, let's consider Jingles as part one, this idea that the minority group has to be sufficiently large and geographically compact to constitute a majority in a single member district. The way that plaintiffs have proven this in Section 2 litigation is to submit illustrative maps as alternatives to the state's plan. Said, you shouldn't have drawn the map that you did. You should instead have drawn a map like this one that we're offering to the court that creates additional majority-minority districts. What Justice Alito said is that when you're creating those illustrative maps, you can't use race as a criterion in drawing them. That is, you can't put into the computer, give us a plan that produces 2 or 3 majority-minority districts. Instead, Justice Alito says it's not a Section 2 violation for the government to draw districts that don't privilege race. So if you draw a set of districts and you can come up with those lines only by privileging race, you're not proving that the state violated the Constitution or violated Section 2 when it didn't draw the same districts that you wanted drawn. And the second thing that Alito says about this sufficiently large and geographically compact prong of the Jingles requirement is that he says when you create these illustrative maps and you don't consider race in creating them, you must ensure that the illustrative map satisfies all of the government's other criteria. So if the government wants to draw districts that basically retain the shape of the prior districts, or that protect incumbents, or that protect the party in power, the illustrative maps have to achieve those interests as well. This is hugely important because what often drives this litigation, like what often drives everything else in politics, is partisanship. So you'll have a Republican legislature that'll draw districts so as to get the re-election of Republicans. And you'll have Democrats who come in and use the Voting Rights Act and say, well, you got to draw a district that's going to be controlled by minority groups who are going to vote Democratic. And so you're going to create these extra majority-minority districts. But really what the Democratic side cares about is you're going to undermine the Republican majority. You're going to reduce the number of seats controlled by Republicans. You're going to increase the number of seats controlled by Democrats. So Justice Alito says, if you got a Republican gerrymander that's drawn for political purposes rather than racial purposes, the illustrative maps have to say you need to create extra majority-minority districts that also result in the election of the same number of Republicans. So that's hugely important. It makes it really, really difficult to succeed on a Section 2 claim. But Justice Alito wasn't done.
Impossible, basically. But
the court wasn't done. I say Justice Alito, but he's speaking for a 6-justice majority. This isn't a plurality opinion like in past cases. Not split at all. We have a solid 6-justice majority.
Why didn't Amy Coney Barrett at least concurrent part? I'm pretty that's a big point against her. I don't know. Big point against her on this one, guys.
Of these conclusions. So the next thing that the court does is that it says, well, you have to compare the preferences of the minority group to the preferences of the majority. Because obviously, if the majority and the minority prefer the same candidates, well, then you're not harming anybody's ability to elect candidates, no matter how you draw the districts, because you all prefer the same candidates, and those candidates are going to win. In the past, at least what some people have interpreted the Voting Rights Act to mean, is that if minority groups prefer Democrats and the majority prefers Republicans, then automatically you satisfy this criterion of racially polarized voting. The minority group votes sufficiently as a block to say, well, we have a preference, and it's whoever the Democrats nominate. And the white majority has an alternative preference for the Republican candidate. And if the majority is more numerous, because it's after all the majority, then it's likely to be able to result in the defeat of the minority preferred candidate. So this prior interpretation had basically said, if you're in a jurisdiction where minorities prefer Democrats like they usually do, and whites prefer Republicans like they often do, then you automatically have racially polarized voting. Justice Alito says, no, that's not what it means. That
I mean, that kind of is what it means, though, no? I don't understand you could try to... That just seems like such an unbelievably foolhardy quest. Today, we seek to disentangle politics from race. What? Whatever. I don't know, man.
You figure out racially polarized voting. When you're trying to figure out whether the minority group has political preferences and whether the white majority has political preferences, you must control for party preferences. So if the whites vote for Republicans and the minorities vote for Democrats, then favoring the Republican candidate is not racial discrimination, and it's not a violation of Section 2. It's political rather than racial.
Oh.
And instead, what you have to show, I'll wrap up short. Instead, what you have to show is that the whites refuse to vote for candidates who are minority regardless of party. And same thing with the minority group. But that's going to be a very hard show.
Jump in right there on the concept of disentangling race. You have to give credit to Justice Alito's fearlessness. He basically...
Is that what we're calling it? Fearlessness? That's true. He does not give a fuck if he looks like a fucking retard. True. Fearless.
Disentangling race. You have to give credit to Justice Alito's fearlessness. He points out the whole reason the VRA was enacted is that back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, white Democrats refused to vote for black Democrats. And so he just laid it out right there. That was the way the world was back.
Oh my God. Oh, anytime I can reference the parties when they had opposing political views, oh God. God tickles my balls for 20 seconds. Oh, remember when white Democrats wouldn't vote for blacks?
Then, and that's why there was a need for this sort of protection.
Fuck, actually, I think I even remember reading this. Didn't I say that? Fuck, wait, I did. Fuck, where's yesterday's VOD? Oh, it's private. Fucking cuck destiny. I think I remember reading this like yesterday or the day before when I was like, oh man, Alito is so fucking horny here to reference the white Democrats not voting for blacks. And this guy, he did it. He got it. He got horny off it too. I knew it. I can see the horniness. Fucking losers.
That was the way the world was back then. But and that's why there was a need for this sort of protection. But the world has changed. It's not like that anymore.
That's right. Yeah, he points out.
It's not like that anymore. Now everybody votes equally for everybody. Oh no, wait, it just swapped.
Exactly that fact. You're absolutely correct. And in 1982, and certainly as you say before that point, you can speak of racial discrimination within voting as distinct from politics, and of course to some extent you still can. But to the extent that politics has overtaken race, Justice Alito says we have moved beyond the concerns that Section 2 was put in place to address. And then so far I've considered the three preconditions from Jingles and the way that Justice Alito's majority opinion addresses those or reformulates them. The totality of the circumstances test is changed by this opinion too, and again in a significant way. That it is no longer the case, to the extent it ever was, it's no longer the case that you can demonstrate a totality of the circumstances showing that minority groups lack an equal opportunity to elect legislators of their choice simply by pointing to a disparity between their share of the population and their share of control over legislative seats. That is, mere disproportionate representation of racial groups is not an unequal opportunity to elect representatives of your choice. Instead, Justice Alito says, well, what Section 2 means by that is that we need to focus on circumstances that show a substantial likelihood of intentional discrimination in voting. That is, you don't have to prove what was in the mind of legislators. It's not purely an intent test. Court says we are still focused on results, but the results have to be more than simply disproportionate control of legislative seats. Instead, you have to go back to pre-1982 cases that the Supreme Court decided interpreting the constitutional protection against voting discrimination, where the court said that what violates the Constitution is a combination of electoral rules, cultural conditions, and other kinds of laws that have the effect as a whole of blocking minorities from participating in the political process and translating their preferences into political results. And if you don't have that, because if you do have it, then it indicates a kind of likelihood of intentional discrimination. But if you don't have it, all you have is a disproportionate result. That's not the kind of thing that Section 2 interferes with.
Right. And getting back to resolving the tension, he says you need to be able to show that all of these circumstances combine to create a strong inference of intentional discrimination when it comes to this districting plan, which in modern day times is going to be extremely difficult to show because it's a very different world than it was 50, 60 years ago. And that's a theme that he picked up on that's very consistent.
Wrong, dipshit. It's difficult to show that because people don't usually say that. And even when he says it's a different world from 50, 60 years ago, yeah, but 50, 60 years ago, we got rid of the intent part because even back in the days of Jim Crow, it was hard to show intentionally racist tests. That's why I got so mad at that stupid, the fucking Muin Rabbani guy who was telling me that apartheid and Jim Crow were the same thing. I bring this up a lot because I got to trigger the fuck out of me. The whole point about Jim Crow laws, and the whole point about discrimination in the South was that you could do it without saying no blacks allowed, no black people can vote on this day, no black. You found a whole bunch of clever ways to nibble around the edges and to, in effect, basically ban certain minorities over black people from voting without actually saying no black people voting. That was the whole point. This is why the totality of circumstances thing came into existence.
With some of the several cases of the Chief Justice Roberts Court that basically says, hey, let's look at reality. We live in a very different country than we did back then. As one example, we did an amicus brief in this case for Center for Election Confidence, and one issue we stressed was that jingles requires intense racial segregation to work at its first step. But the country, including the South, is much more integrated, and Section 2 litigators and
I'm sorry.
Example, we did an amicus brief in this case for Center for Election Confidence, and one issue we stressed was that jingles requires intense racial segregation to work at its first step. But the country, including the South, is much more integrated.
Just curious, because I haven't looked at a thing in a long time, or maybe ever. If I were to look at southern states, and I were to look at the distribution of black people in southern states, would it be roughly or close to like evenly spread throughout the entire state? Or is it going to be highly concentrated in a few cities? Just curious. I don't really answer that. If anybody's a map, I'm just curious to see it,
And Section 2 litigators and sort of lefty election law professors write that, this is a problem for our Voting Rights Act cases, that we're so much more integrated. And we say, this should be celebrated. And Justice Alito agrees. He wrote, and sort of lefty election law professors write that, this is a problem for our Voting Rights Act cases, that we're so much more integrated. And we say, this should be celebrated. And Justice Alito agrees. He wrote, if as a result of this progress, it is hard to find pertinent evidence relating to intentional present-day voting discrimination, that is cause for celebration. And that's one of my favorite lines of the case. And we say, this should be celebrated. And Justice Alito agrees. He wrote, if as a result of this progress, it is hard to find pertinent evidence relating to intentional present-day voting discrimination, that is cause for celebration.
Yeah, but that was the case back with Jim Crow as well. That's why they had to change the test.
And that's one of my favorite lines of the case. So, Micah, one other thing that stood out to me is that Justice Alito cited the SFFA versus Harvard case multiple times. And although we didn't really put it in these terms, the concept of safe Black or Hispanic districts are essentially quotas or affirmative action for politicians. And the upshot is that this should be no different. He also said, and he quoted SFFA to say, there are extremely limited circumstances where this court has ever allowed the consideration of race. And the only two really have been avoiding race riots in prison and where there's an actual finding of discrimination in violation of the statute or the Constitution. And he said this added to the list, but it really is kind of an extension of part two of the second in that extremely short list. But on the Harvard case, I do want to say a shout out to our friend Edward Bloom for all of his work, not just in the Harvard case, but for his work in the Voting Rights Act starting many years ago. So, Mike, in terms of what does this mean, most immediately it's expected that some red states will now look at their maps and say, there was no race discrimination that justified setting aside these 2 or 3 or however many majority minority districts, so we're going to reevaluate and get rid of them. Doesn't the Texas litigation and now Calais show the Supreme Court is likely not going to stand in the way of that?
I think that's true. I think that the major practical effect of this case is that it's going to free Republican-controlled states to draw district lines without worrying that they're going to get sued under Section 2 if they don't create a certain number of majority-minority districts. Now, this doesn't totally get rid of Section 2.
It does. This guy's even said it. Is like these cases, he said, I think, when he described like the first like 1 or 2 sections of the reworked of this new test, he said it would be extremely difficult. And then he's like, and then there's another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. I don't see how you could ever bring one of these cases now, but maybe I'm just not creative enough. Unless you literally have like an email leak where they're like, ban all N-words from voting. No more blacks. No more black votes in this state. Then maybe you could do it. Maybe.
Number of majority-minority districts. Now, this doesn't totally get rid of Section 2. It does allow certainly for the possibility of a lawsuit where there either is intentional discrimination or there are circumstances that give rise to a significant influence.
Actually, no, not even in that, because even when intentional discrimination has happened, you have to give a map that still satisfies all of the same things that, besides the racism part, that the state wanted in their map. So it doesn't even matter. Like, whatever new map you suggest as a plaintiff is going to basically look like the fucking one that the last legislature was suggesting anyway.
For example, if you have take an example that Justice Kagan gives in her.
Yeah, give us an example. What?
Of a lawsuit where there either is intentional discrimination or there are circumstances that give rise to a significant influence. For example, if you have take an example that Justice Kagan gives in her dissent. If you have a solidly minority city that would be a district and the government decides to carve it up so as to deprive the minority group of voting influence, then it's possible that would still be considered a Section 2 violation. Of course, the government then would...
Oh, shit. I'm sorry. I thought they actually read Kagan's argument. Did he just get a human centipede to shit out after going through 3 other digestive tracts what her opinion was? Because her entire point with opening with that example was that this is something that the current Gingell's rework test would exactly allow you to do, would be to crack that district open and say it's just being done on partisan lines and you'd be 100% A-okay with doing it. Why would he cite the opening example in her first sentence? The first sentence that Kagan writes, break up this example, and then claim that it shows exactly the opposite of what her whole argument was. What?
The minority group of voting influence, then it's possible that would still be considered a Section 2 violation. Of course, the government then would try to divide it to defend on the ground by saying that we're dividing up that group not because of race, but because of partisanship. And so you still have to kind of fight about it. But
no, you wouldn't have a fight. You would automatically lose, according to Alito's new test. There wouldn't be a fight. You would lose.
The case at least still allows for the possibility of that kind of suit. But
no, it doesn't. You either didn't read any of it. Well, I don't understand how he can possibly say that. Stranger 526, thank you for giving subs. 5 of them in King Chat.
I think you're absolutely right that even if it's too late to do it now, before the midterms are only 6 months away. Most of the districts in most of the states are pretty well set.
Yeah, there's no way you could do it now. Imagine if you fucking started canceling votes and halting current elections in order to fucking rush to your state legislature to redraw your map. It's not like people are going to do that shit, right?
But I think that before the next elections and certainly immediately after the 2030 census, you're going to have a lot of Republican states that are going to draw more heavily Republican-favored district lines because they don't have to worry as much about a Section 2 suit.
So, one more shout out. I would like to congratulate our fellow executive committee member on the election law group, Eddie Grime, who represented the Calais plaintiffs on this case. So congratulations to Eddie. And Mike, if you don't have any more points that you want to talk about, perhaps we could look at some of the questions, Libby.
It's just, I just don't understand because the whole reason nobody is ever going to racially discriminate when they are drawing up new gerrymanders. That might seem counterintuitive, but it's plainly true. There's no world where a Republican state legislature would look at a black district that gets to vote, that votes Republican, and would think, my God, those damn blacks, we got to split them up, even if it hurts our total seat count. That's just never going to happen. In any case where you are racially gerrymandering, you will always have a politically partisan reason to do it. There's literally no case, unless you're so fucking racist. You're like, God damn it, I don't care if we get an extra seat in the House. We got to split these blacks up into other districts, God damn it. Even if it gives the Democrats another seat in our state, we got to split them up. This is never going to happen. There will never be a world where this happens. It's so goofy.
That have come
Yeah,
up.
absolutely. We've got 2 down here. One's on Section 2 about if the majority opinion requires proof of.
By the way, if you want to know who the Federalist Society is, I'm pretty sure 7, I think, of the 9 current Supreme Court justices come from the Federalist Society. I think it's 6 of them do, and then Roberts was a fucking guest speaker for 4 years or something. So it's basically 7, I think, of the 9 current Supreme Court justices come from the Federalist Society. Or no. It's 5 of the 9 come directly from it, and then the 6th is, I think you can argue whether or not Roberts is not. Sorry, not 7. 6. My bad. Don't say it. Yeah, that's right. Good job. Of the current 9 members of the Supreme Court of the United States, at least 5 are current or former members of the organization. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Thomas, Alito, and Barrett. Chief Justice John Roberts previously served as a member of the steering committee of the Washington, D.C. chapter, but denies ever being a member.
Discriminatory intent, and if so, how does that square with Section 2's? Yeah, absolutely. We've got 2 down here. One's on Section 2 about if the majority opinion requires proof of discriminatory intent, and if so, how does that square with Section 2's focus on a discriminatory result?
Yeah.
As a formal matter, it does not require discriminatory intent, but as a formal matter, it does not require discriminatory intent. But as we mentioned, the court does require circumstances that give rise to an inference of discriminatory intent.
Like, you can say that, but like, it's like saying, like, in order to come into this room, first you have to hold your breath for 10 minutes. And it's like, okay, well, so I have to die first? And it's like, I didn't say you had to die. You just have to hold your breath for 10 minutes and then you're welcome to come into this room. Like, how are you supposed to draw an inference to discriminatory intent when the state can do everything without naming racial intent to discriminate, but still in effect discriminate, and then always just fall back on some partisan divide reason? You will never... I don't know. I mean, hold me to it. Follow for the next 4 years or whatever, assuming I don't get arrested or assassinated. If another Section 2 case is ever brought before a district court, I'm just so curious how you would ever evaluate this case, how it would survive anything.
The formal matter, it does not require discriminatory intent. But as we mentioned, the court does require circumstances that give rise to an inference of discriminatory intent. So it certainly cuts back on the understanding that it prevailed up until this point, that all that mattered was results, and the only result that mattered was a disproportion in the legislative seats that were controlled.
Great. And then Brad, I don't know if you want to add anything there, but it sounds like you guys covered that pretty well. So great.
Point that all that mattered was results, and the only result that mattered was a disproportion in the legislative seats that were controlled.
Great. And then Brad, I don't know if you want to add anything there, but it sounds like you guys covered that pretty well as well. And then we have another one on asking.
Destiny, yeah, so it's not a racial discrimination. Seems like you want it to be a racial discrimination, so it is allowed. Yeah, Xorn and that other retard in YouTube chat, you guys can keep saying this and crying about this all you want. If you don't like it, and I think maybe you could even make arguments why you don't like it, that's fine. Change the fucking law. This was the law of the land for 37 years. The Supreme Court had agreed on it, right? It was a law before the Supreme Court agreed on it 37 years ago, where they rejected how the Congress was using it. Congress amended the law, and then everybody agreed on what it was. That's fine if you don't like it, but then change the fucking law. Don't rely on the God whisperers to give you a new interpretation of the Constitution to strike something down that you didn't like congressionally pass.
Looking for further examples of fact situations where Section 2 would still support a claim. Sounds like you guys covered that pretty well as well. And then we have another one on asking for further examples of fact situations where Section 2 would still support a claim.
Well, I'll let Mike chime in. I think the one he already posed is the most likely place where you could have these sort of claim where, for example, a big city like Atlanta, Houston, New Orleans, where a Republican state legislature would perhaps get overzealous and start carving up slices out into the suburbs and beyond.
I did many times. He doesn't respond. What are you saying? Brown v. Board was the law of the land. Did you mean to say Plessy v. Ferguson was the law of the land? Or what? I don't know what the point of, I don't know, or maybe I'm too stupid to understand what your point is for saying.
A Republican...
I think he meant Plessy was the law of the land. I don't know.
State legislature would perhaps get overzealous and a place where you could have these sort of claim where, for example, a big city like Atlanta, Houston, New Orleans, where a Republican state legislature would perhaps get overzealous and start carving up slices out into the suburbs and beyond. The old expression is cracking the district. I think that is one area where you would have litigation. Mike, I'll turn it over to you for...
Why? Why would you be able to litigate that? As long as they're making sure they're doing it for partisan reasons, it's A-okay. So you're completely fucking wrong. I don't know if you're just lying to give cover to the dog shit decision. But if you can do it for partisan reasons, why would that ever be disallowed? Why can't we have computer chip districts?
Other examples?
Yeah, let me give you one more possibility. I don't think that there's going to be too many of these, but if you have a significant divide within the Democratic Party between the candidates who are preferred by minority voters and the candidates who are preferred by white Democrats, if the white Democrats are in control and draw district lines in such a way as to harm the interests of the candidates who are preferred by the minorities, that could still give rise to a claim. So it's the court in this case says...
So you're going to redistrict based on protecting primary votes? It's retarded. This will never happen. This will never happen.
We're not going to consider it racial discrimination if we can explain the differences in preferences just by pointing to party. But if you're within a single party and minority groups have different preferences, then I think Section 2 still has a role to play.
All right, Libby, we almost made it in 30 minutes. So I think
well done. I'm very impressed. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today, for sharing your expertise and opinions on this really important decision. For our audiences interested in learning more about all of our programming here at the Federalist Society, please visit our website at fedsoc.org, that is FEDSOC.org, or feel free to send us your feedback. We always love to hear it at fedsocforums@fedsoc.org. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What do these losers have to say?
Democracy docket, and then we may add a few additional beats on the court's.
Let me ask questions in a non-loaded manner. How would you engage in partisan gerrymandering if there is a majority-minority district? And if you cannot, do certain states benefit from partisan gerrymandering, like California or Texas, while other states suffer from being unable to? Are you asking me how I would do it in a perfect world? Or are you asking me what the laws on the books were and how the Supreme Court seemed to interpret them and how the rest of the states in the U.S. seem to understand it? Because those are different questions. I don't appreciate being asked whether or not I support partisan gerrymandering on racial lines or whatever. That's not the question before the court. Is what does Stephen Bunnell personally think, or what is your personal opinion on it? The question is there's a law in the books. There seems to have been an understanding of this law for decades, and now the court has changed that understanding of the law because only they can somehow glimpse the Constitution to understand and divine its meaning that the rest of us mortals can't. Before this current SCOTUS decision, how would you engage in partisan gerrymandering if there is a majority-minority district? And if you cannot, do certain states benefit from the partisan gerrymandering like California or Texas while other states suffer from being unable to? My guess is that in today's environment, certain states would probably be hit more by this than other states if their minority population was more concentrated and had a differing political view than the majority racial group of that state. So this would probably benefit states that are more racially diverse and their population is more integrated, and it would probably hurt states that are more segregated. But do you understand that kind of what I'm getting at here is that was probably the purpose of the law? That was probably the intention of the law? Like, if I were to put it curtly or rudely or aggressively, I would say more racist states are probably going to be hurt by this law, and less racist states would probably be less affected by the law. Because in order for Section 2 to trigger, you would probably need to have a contiguous minority population that consistently votes differently than your majority white population, which seems like it would generally impact states that have racial issues more. So, I mean, again, if you don't like it, I can understand why that might feel bad, but then the issue is with the law, not with anything else.
Reasoning, such as it is. Welcome back to the show, Mark.
Well, I wish I was coming back under better circumstances, but...
So they basically scrapped the Jingles rule, right? Correct. The Jingles is no longer in effect. Or the framework, basically.
Guess I'm glad to be back.
This is rarely the case in this line of work, but today is an especially bad one.
You know, Leah Littman is a judicial realist, and she was right.
Careful. That's T-shirts printing in 30 seconds is the sound you're hearing right now. But she indeed was right then and will continue to be right. Anyway, Mark, super grateful that you're joining us on a day like this. Let's just quickly remind our listeners of the facts of Calais. They're pretty well known. The state of Louisiana drew districts that allowed black voters to select preferred candidates in 1 out of 6 districts, even though about 1/3 of Louisiana citizens are black. The math wasn't mathing unless districts were drawn to lock them out of power. Maybe ding, ding, ding.
Because courts said that map violated the Voting Rights Act, Louisiana was required to draw new districts that complied with the VRA. It did so. The districts gave minority voters opportunity to select another candidate, and that compliant map with 2 black opportunity districts was challenged as unconstitutional discrimination. And in Calais, Sam Alito said the Voting Rights Act, properly construed, did not require Louisiana to draw a new district because its initial map, locking black voters out of political power, was very legal, very cool, very demure, and very mindful.
So, okay, Mark, we are legal nerds, as are you, so we are definitely going to get into the court's reasoning. But this decision is also just super significant for our multiracial
You can tell this lady is an idiot because where are the books? Empty bookshelves? Seriously? I'm supposed to take this one seriously?
democracy, and kind of we wanted to start there with a question of impact. So can you talk about what effect the decision is going to have on maps, districting, and democracy in general?
Yeah, so first of all, this was as cynical a decision as the Supreme Court could possibly issue. I mean, to be honest with you, it would have been much more intellectually honest for them to just say Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional under whatever theory of unconstitutional. The idea that the conservatives and the majority on this court are saying that they are properly construing Section 2 is literally them saying black voters can have districts as long as they vote for Republicans. Yes. That is essentially the holding of this. So what does this mean for democracy? It's a big setback, and we need to be honest about that. Like, you know, this was the gutting of the last piece of the Voting Rights Act doing work. And it was the provision that particularly was important because it applied nationwide. A point I might add that the Chief Justice himself made when he wrote the opinion striking down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County. He said, don't worry, this Section 2 still very vital, applies everywhere, don't worry.
And then he said, watch this, psych.
So it's bad for a multiracial democracy. It's bad for democracy. Like what has happened here is that in a series of court cases,
I get that was the intention behind the law, but the view of SCOTUS would be the law was unconstitutional to begin with, and the previous SCOTUS was wrong in their interpretation, like they feel they were wrong in the Roe v. Wade ruling. If you want to have that opinion, that's fine. And listen, I don't have the legal history to make a super strong argument. I don't know, maybe historically, maybe I would be wrong here, but in my understanding, courts undermine their own legitimacy when they constantly backtrack on older rulings. That if today a court says one thing and then tomorrow the court says the totally opposite thing, that the court is undermining itself as an institution and showing that it's not to be trusted or not to be believed. And then we lose, as citizens, the ability to navigate our environment in a legally sound manner because we don't know if the court's going to change up how they're going to do things tomorrow or the day after or the week after or the year after. That you can't have a court, especially when unified with Congress, who all seem to agree on a thing. You can't have this standing for decades and then just have a new Supreme Court come in and say, never mind. You're undermining the legitimacy of your court at that point. It seems like you are just whatever, you know?
The Supreme Court has said partisan gerrymandering, just fine. Discriminating against minority voters now, just fine. As law, and if you want to impose a minority majority district or a Voting Rights Act district, it needs to reflect the partisan impulses of the legislature, which are just fine because partisan gerrymandering is just fine. So what we are left with is that in state after state where Republicans control the entire process, they have the legislative control and the gubernatorial process, government control, they will now gerrymander on explicitly partisan grounds that will insulate them in one direction. They will trample all over the voting rights of minority voters with near impunity. And they will look and say, look, we met all the Supreme Court's tests under the Voting Rights Act. That is why it is so cynical, Kate, because it would have been better for them to just say, there is no Voting Rights Act, but rather to hang that what they are now going to say is lawful under the Voting Rights Act is an absolute abomination.
So it's an abomination and it's wildly cynical. Is it also politically strategic? I mean, you think about comparing a decision like this to Dobbs, which said forthrightly, we are overturning Roe versus Wade, and that really galvanized an important electoral and popular reaction. I think it's entirely possible that a decision that said forthrightly, we are actually overruling on the grounds of the Constitution, the last remaining vestige of the Voting Rights Act, that might have spurred a real response. And I hope this one does too, but was it kind of framed the way it was in order to reduce the chances of that kind of response and pushback?
Yeah, I think that's exactly why they did it this way. I think exactly they did it that way, and I think we can't allow them to get away with that. I'm old enough, Kate, and this was very controversial at the time. It's hard for people to recognize this was actually controversial at the time. In 1993, there was a debate in the Casey decision whether the pro-choice community ought to just say this is overturning Roe versus Wade. And by the way, I was in the camp of saying, yeah, we ought to just say what the Supreme Court is doing here is fundamentally altering Roe versus Wade in a way that is going to allow.
But it is always a sliding scale. Justices argue that sometimes there are going to be bad rulings that should be overturned. It's never clear cut. I imagine Destiny would like the presidential immunity to be overturned. I would like the presidential immunity to be overturned because I think it's a bad ruling, but I think it stands in contrast to the last 250 years of what we've decided how the law should be in this country. I don't think that there's ever been a historical understanding of the United States of America that anybody is immune from committing crimes. Now, if I was 142 years old, the year is 2120 or whatever, and we've had the presidential immunity ruling on the books for 100 years, and that's just how we've operated, and then at that point, somebody's like, what do you think about criminal immunity, right? I would say, I thought that was a horrible decision by the court. But it stood. This has been our understanding for the past 100 years. You can't just have a new Supreme Court come up and overturn this decision. It would just undermine what the court is for, right? But yeah, you can't bring up presidential immunity like that is contradicting anything I've just said. In my opinion, that's a super new ruling that has never, ever, ever been understood to be how the president of the United States is supposed to function.
For its eventual chipping away and overturning. Now, that doesn't mean I was right. But, it stood for a much longer period of time than I thought it would. But I think the risk that we face right now is those of us in the pro-democracy community take the bait and say, well, at least they didn't overturn the Voting Rights Act. No, they overturned the Voting Rights Act.
And I think Justice Kagan also called this out, the attempt to basically depict the opinion as doing something other than it did. She said its opinion basically presents itself as understated, even antiseptic. And the majority doesn't announce today's holding as all but nullifying the Voting Rights Act when it did. I mean, this could be the most significant Supreme Court race-related decision in a while, just given, dismantling the number of districts, electing representatives for minority communities that could be at stake. We've talked about this before, but just to remind our listeners, Nick Stephanopoulos, professor at Harvard Law, voting rights expert, estimated that somewhere about 70 congressional districts could be stripped of protection under the Voting Rights Act, and that's just the number of districts in Congress. Mark, I know we've talked about this decision, and this decision has been talked about in terms of what it might mean for the 2026 midterms. Florida seemed interested in potentially taking this up and drawing even more districts. What might this decision mean for the upcoming midterms?
All right, so Florida is, as we speak, drawing a new map, and they are going to add or try to add 4 more Republican seats. Now, I think in Florida, just at a political level, I think that's going to probably backfire on them. And I think actually the congressional delegation knows that, which is why they're not all that keen on this. I think Ron DeSantis is auditioning for something else with Donald Trump, and he figures he won't be blamed if this winds up being a dummy mander. He'll get the credit for doing the here and now. Sounds very familiar in Trump world. But I think your broader question, though, is the right one, which is, what does this mean for 2026? What does it mean for 2028? In 2026, look, I think there will be, obviously it'll affect at least 1 seat in Louisiana, maybe 2. Perhaps it impacts a seat in Alabama. Maybe, maybe not. I say that because there's another VRA case that's kind of percolating before the court. Beyond that, Republicans need to be careful in 2 directions. The first is at a political level. They are facing an unpopular electorate that doesn't much care for them. And, it's not like when you redistrict, voters go away.
Just as a quick thing, so now I understand this a little bit more. So Tennessee canceled or interrupted a current vote in order to adopt a new gerrymander on Thursday? Am I understanding this correctly? Is that really? Before Thursday, state law required county election commissions to immediately notify voters by mail when their polling place or precinct changed because of redistricting. Among other notices, alerts also had to be published in newspapers. The law was meant to ensure that voters know where to cast their ballots ballots during early voting or on election day. But in their bill repealing a 5-decade prohibition on mid-decade redistricting, Republicans included an amendment that only requires county election commissions to post a notice about redrawn congressional districts on their official website, if one exists. This is king behavior. Under the repeal, which is expected to be signed into law by Governor Bill Lee, the Secretary of State also has to publish a notice, but mail and newspaper notices are no longer required to inform voters about changed boundaries. Deborah Fisher, the executive director of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, a nonpartisan transparency group, said in a release Thursday that the change was likely meant to reduce cost, though she warned that the voting public will be harmed when it takes effect. When polling places or precincts are changed, more effort should be made to reach affected voters, not less. The Republicans had to appeal the prohibition on mid-decade redistricting before they pushed through their new congressional map, which cracks the state's only majority black district between 3 separate districts. Because of the new map, several local voting areas were shifted into new congressional districts. This means polling places likely changed for hundreds of voters across the state. While debating the map in the Tennessee Senate Thursday, Senator Haidt Campbell, a Democrat who represents Nashville, accused Republicans of intentionally misleading voters through the notice change. We're not just redrawing the map, we're making sure people don't have to be told the map changed. Reacting to the notice change Thursday, Norman Orstein, a prominent political scientist formerly with the American Enterprise Institute, called it Jim Crow on steroids. When did the Supreme Court decision come out? So they did this a couple days after? Sheesh. Was it May 5th? And they did this on the 7th. They were like, God damn, let's go.
way, right? I mean, these minority voters have to go in someone's district, and I don't see a lot of Republicans in these states raising their hand to say, oh yes, please take my 65% Republican district and make it a 52, 55% Republican district in this political environment. So that may put a little bit of a break on it. But I think the real break on it for 2026 is just the logistics and the practicality. I mean, the federal law requires that military and overseas ballots go out 45 days before a primary and 90 days before a general. And like, those are hard federal deadlines that like states can't mess with. States have already had primaries. And, there's a lot of talk, on the right about, oh, we'll just hold new primaries. Let me be honest with you. And you can share this with your Republican guests if you ever have any. If they think they get to just disenfranchise a bunch of voters who have already voted by saying, never mind, they're going to get sued. And under the conservatives' analysis in Bost, where they adopted Justice Scalia's language about undermining the foundation of democracy and confidence in elections by after the fact throwing out votes. I don't think they're going to get away with that. At least they're going to get sued if they try to get away with it. So I think it'll be relatively modest for 2026. I think 2028, I hear estimates all over the place. The New York Times says 12, Fair Fight, founder Stacey Abrams says it's closer to 30, Nick Stephanopoulos says maybe it's 70. It's going to be a lot of seats that are going to be in play. But I want to offer you.
Early voting continues in Louisiana, even as the status of the state's primary elections remain in flux. Last week, the Supreme Court struck down Louisiana's congressional map, and the state's Republican governor suspended primary elections for the U.S. House so new districts could be set. But voting in the U.S. Senate race is proceeding. What is the status on all this? We should go, maybe tomorrow I'll look up where's everybody out on there? Gerrymandering stuff. How old is this article? May 7th, 2027. How bad was Louisiana's map that it got struck down as racist? Would it get struck down now if they tried to do the exact same thing?
One piece of hope. After Shelby County, everybody said this is going to cost Democrats seats everywhere. And I went and I sued Virginia and I sued North Carolina saying, well, it turns out if Section 5 wasn't a rationale to draw Bobby Scott's district, if it wasn't a rationale to support drawing the state legislative lines of Virginia, if it wasn't a rationale to gerrymander blacks into 2 districts in North Carolina, then I guess it wasn't a rationale. And I sued and I won those cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. It led to the creation of additional black districts and additional Democratic seats in both states.
So I guess when you're thinking about, the prospect of future litigation, Justice Kagan in dissent said today's decision makes Section 2 a dead letter. Justice Thomas seemed to enthusiastically agree, saying even though he would have said no challenge to redistricting should ever succeed, this decision basically put an end to what he called the disastrous misadventure. What does this decision do to Section 2? And relatedly, how does that interact with partisan gerrymandering, which seemed to be both part of the court's reasoning and also what it envisioned to be the future of American democracy?
Yeah. So first of all, I just have to say, because you guys will appreciate this, you've got Justice Alito.
Never mind. I see. Okay, this is the decision that we just read. Their new gerrymander was the one that would have included an extra black district, and the case that we just read, the Supreme Court struck down their redistricting that would have included the extra black district. Okay.
Saying, we didn't do anything here. This was just nothing. Yeah. And then you have Justice Thomas was like, thank God we did this.
Speaking of Dobbs, right? The guy can't keep it under wraps. He's like, no, this is what we're doing, team.
Right. They didn't work that out just between them. Look, I think for Section 2 litigation, it's going to be virtually impossible to bring Section 2 cases successfully because in order to do so, you're going to have to meet the political objectives of the legislature. So effectively what this means is that if you want to bring a Section 2 case in Alabama on behalf of black voters, you need to draw a map in which the black voters vote Republican, which the idea that we are hinging minority voting rights on a partisan outcome is an absolute catastrophe and insult.
I don't know how the Jingles test has been applied, previously and everything else. And I guess I don't know how huge these areas are, but I feel like you could strike down this map without the new axing of Section 2 of this Voting Rights Act. Would we consider this a compact, contiguous district? I mean, this seems kind of goofy to draw two black districts, I think. Yes, it's along the river. Oh, fuck, I don't know. Oh, fuck Louisiana. I don't know enough about Louisiana. I don't know.
I mean, I can't use words strongly enough. So I think that Section 2 will no longer be a vital tool.
Like, you might as well require plaintiffs to show that the tooth fairy is real, just while you're at it.
That's right. So I think that the two tools, or the two things that remain out there, is number one, partisan gerrymandering, which, you know, conservatives have taken from a necessary, non-justiciable evil, right? We don't like it, but geez, we, the Supreme Court, are powerless to do anything about it. We looked for a test, and we just couldn't come up with it. Like, it's the one thing that was just too complicated for us.
But Robert's right. Remember, and Richard does say distasteful, maybe worse. Yes. Like, he is very explicit about the disapproval. But sorry, Mark, you were going to say fast forward to this.
Now they have turned it into a positive good.
A constitutional entitlement to the highest value, in fact.
It is, in fact, now a traditional redistricting criteria that we ought to value in the process. So that's going on, but that doesn't mean that state courts will do that. Yes. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of attention to state constitutions and state processes around partisan redistricting. And then the second, which you haven't mentioned, is there is still an inherent tension. And this goes back to the cases that I brought after Shelby County. There is still this inherent tension between the intentional discrimination line of cases, the racial gerrymandering line of cases, and this, because, like, does anyone think that when Republicans are going to draw a map, you know, they're not shuffling black voters based on their race? I mean, of course they are. Like, they don't want Democrats in their districts, but, like, what they really don't want are Black Democrats in their district. And if that sounds weird to people, like, we were able to prove that in the post-Shelby County litigation we brought, where you looked at these neighborhoods, and it was a professor from Stanford who did this analysis. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Roden, Jonathan Roden, I think, did this analysis. And he plotted it out on graphs, and you'd look at these neighborhoods, and there'd be like a group of, let's just call them white liberals, okay, but good Democrats, but white, next to a neighborhood of Black Democrats. And the Republican legislature was taking the white Democrats, not the Black Democrats. And you know that in the South, in particular, that is going to be a dynamic that is going to leave them open to those challenges. Now, the question is whether under Alexander, yet another case where they kind of like, tried to limit this, whether they're going to say, well, that's okay. You know, it's okay if you are intentionally discriminating against Black voters in that way.
Well, whatever they're going to do.
Sorry if that was very wonky.
No,
very wonky.
No, but I mean, I think that sort of the point is that they have not resolved all ambiguity in this incredibly complex body of law, nor have they foreclosed all possible avenues. Now, I wouldn't put it past them to do that down the road, but you're saying that the evidence of even if they have imposed an intentional discrimination requirement, there may be enough evidence to actually succeed in making out those claims in future litigation. And we know enough to know that you, Mark Elias, are going to be dogged in bringing any bringable and winning any case out there that can be won. So
I want to add.
Yeah, if there's any note of hope that you can leave our listeners with.
No, it's not a note of hope. Okay, it's actually a note of where we are.
Okay, we'll take that.
I'll take that. Yeah.
So the lawsuit that challenged the Louisiana map was, in fact, a racial gerrymandering challenge, right? The Supreme Court didn't have to decide this question. No. The Supreme Court was not asked to decide this question. The Supreme Court ordered re-argument because they wanted to decide this question. So there's a lot of debate right now, and I know the New York Times published some papers involving the shadow docket, but there's a lot of debate about like this calling balls and strikes umpire thing. This was a case that nobody asked the Supreme Court to decide, and the Supreme Court ordered the parties to re-argue it to decide it. Yeah. And that is a procedural piece of this that I don't think has gotten enough attention. It is the only other instance in my little area of the woods, but you guys are the experts, that where I have experienced this with Citizens United, where literally what the Supreme Court was asked was whether or not pay-per-view movies on cable systems were covered by the campaign finance laws. That's literally the question that was posed to them. And instead of answering that, they ordered the parties to answer a different question, to brief and argue a different question, which led to Citizens United. And it feels like the conservatives are giving up even the pretense of we are just deciding the thing that is litigated before us. And I think that's like another layer of insult to this injury and another threat to where this court will go if they can just not just pick and choose the cases they want to hear, but actually then pick and choose cases they weren't asked to hear.
Yeah. Well, Mark, we know today is a super busy day for you. We so appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks, Mark.
And to provide both our listeners a dose of reality and hope. So thank you so much, Mark.
This channel is called Strict
Scrutiny
Scrutiny.
is brought to you by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. You're not alone if it feels like Groundhog Day every morning when you read the news or even when you listen to what we're talking about here on Strict Scrutiny. And while it's overwhelming, seeing the trajectory our country is on, we all show up every day trying to find ways to make it better, to educate our neighbors, and to fight for democracy. And our friends at Americans United have been doing this. They're going to ask you where you heard about them.
If the racial community consistently votes with the party, then it's okay to deny.
Okay, we got it. We've got memes. What do we have?
And
And I care about results. I care about results. Now, there are certain places certain areas where I don't think that we should ignore some folks' record on some of these issues, right? It's about where we trust intent, where we trust where those outcomes are going. I personally do not trust someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, a proven bigot and anti-Semite, on the issues of what is good for Gazans and Israelis.
An anti-Semite? And why the fuck do you care what's good for Israelis? What?
I know.
What?
I don't think that it benefits our movement, in that instance, to align the left with white nationalists. I don't think it serves us. And so I think it's about looking at the context, the place, the results, the outcomes, intentions, and where we think that train would go. But as far as what someone says about me, I could care less. And, I think it's really about what our outcomes are. And to be honest,
This is just terrible. She sounds just like the establishment. She's attacking an opponent of Israel as an anti-Semite. This is exactly what Israeli supporters want. Split the anti-war movement and the critics of Israel's genocide. Deeply counterproductive and selfish. Where apparently Ryan Graham did this. Where's his reaction to this?
there are some areas where things will not get done if they're partisan because they are anti-establishment. There's bipartisan consensus on keeping and protecting stock trading in Congress. And so it's going to require a massive bipartisan consensus of people willing to come together across those differences to get it done.
Centrist. Sheesh. We'll read this tomorrow. Fuck this. What happened with Virginia? Look at my last dono, please. Hey, Destiny, I've been putting Trump, I did that pointing stickers on gas pumps like people do with Biden in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. It's my first form of activism, you could call it that. What are your thoughts? Sounds like, fuck, what's the name for, not arson. What's the name for damaging property? What the fuck am I thinking of? Vandalism. Oh, but it's micro-vandalism, so that makes it okay. Never mind. Marjorie Taylor Greene sacrificed her political career to stand against genocide, against Trump, against the Epstein class, and to defend the survivors of Epstein's trafficking. If that doesn't earn credibility, I don't know what possibly could. Now that's what I call a cool story, bro. What's going on with this guy?
I've said kind of all I wanted to say with the content comp. That's usually my strategy. Is like, this is my opinion. Take it or leave it. I would do a follow-up video, but generally I want to fucking move on, live my life. With having the Scorched Legume on, I've been indulging the dark side a little too much. I have my own principles, my own values, and I'm like, it allowed me to roll around in the pig shit a little bit more. And there's aspects of that I like, but it's not really like, it doesn't super align with my principles. I think one of the things that sort of woke me up a little bit is like, okay, wait a minute, I need to take a step back. It's the Destiny thing about Ethan and his kids. That was one of those where I was like, oh man, I think I stepped too far out with this one, where it's like, we know the reason that I, showed you guys the comment about Ethan and his kids. It's because it's like Destiny's he's a piece of shit, and he has bad intentions. But
was that comment was him copying my comment supposed to attack me?
We know the reason that I, showed you guys the comment about Ethan and his kids. It's because it's like Destiny's he's a piece of shit, and he has bad intentions. But he's going easy on this guy, not going easy on Denims, Frogan, Casey Tron, Noah, many others, right? And that was my reason for showing it. But I was like, after reflecting a little bit more, I'm like, ugh, I do not want to roll around this pig shit. It's not within my principles to put that online. I don't want to spread that because it's just negative and it's not true. I don't believe it. It didn't feel right. So that's why I'm like, trying to take a step back from the scorched legume stuff and not roll around in the pig shit. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry to Ethan and Ethan's family for putting that nasty Destiny comment out there. I felt like it was an okay thing to do.
Wait, did he get it? This sounds like he's reading. Did he get a cease and desist? That's what this sounds like. Does he retract I formally retract every statement.
Based on the point I was making, but gross shit shouldn't be spread like that. It's hard, man. It's hard because they fucking that shit all the time, and it's like, oh, how do I engage? Well, I have to be nasty back. It's tough. It's tough. From what I've seen, it seems like their podcast has slowed down with the specific harassment, publicized harassment, intentional harassment against Anissa and I. I guess what they do in their free time is up to them, but I need to move on. I need to do other shit. I understand how hard it is to get attention online when you're not relying on kind of the easy shit. And the easy shit is like rolling around in drama.
Okay. Good one.
I've said kind of...
I was mind controlling him. I mind control every single person on the internet, by the way. I control all of them. All the time. Even you, if you're listening to this right now. How the fuck is Hassan finding these tweets? Hassan is not crashing out and lying about his problematic views under 37 like tweets. I can't remember the last time he had the confidence to do battle with us Twitter fans. Or I'm sorry, Twitter titans. Remember, we're always up to debate on your stream, Hassan. Oh. What is he even responding to? Or wait. Was it this? Oh, it was. Low-key, I think it's time to move on from Israel-Palestine discourse and start focusing more on China, especially criticizing Hassan's takes on China. The Hassan bad crowd overdid the shallow drama farming stuff so much that it made any criticism of his easier to dismiss. No, it's because the real criticisms of him nobody would ever take seriously, and the dog shit was the only thing that you motherfuckers cared about. Love that your primary purpose is to try and disparage me. The Israel route failed, so we must move to bastardize his reasonable takes on China. Like, there's a lot we can learn from China despite its shortcomings, or we shouldn't wage war with our major trade partner. Oh, just like he just only wants healthcare.
Off of Marine One earlier in the week. He cannot walk in a straight line.
He's just dodging bullets. You don't weave?
And we've seen this.
Oh my God.
It just keeps on getting worse.
Hater.
Remember last August when Donald Trump met with Putin?
This is strategic.
Same thing. Can't walk in a straight line. Go back, show Marine One. Can't walk in a straight line. Back to the meeting with Putin on the red carpet. Can't walk in a straight line. I'll show you when Donald Trump was recently with the Prime Minister of Japan, Takaishi. Can't walk in a straight line. Then yesterday...
Oh, what? The president can't stop and chat with some soldiers?
Couldn't walk in a straight line when he was walking away from the press.
Well, look how confusing the lawn is cut.
Going to Marine One. He's all over the place. Left, right, left, right.
Maybe he wants to pilot today.
I mean, his hands this week all blotched up with makeup.
Photoshop.
I mean, when you actually looked at it, I mean, there's like, looks like a gallon of makeup.
Oh my God, this guy's a fucking hater. Okay. Yeah, he doesn't want anyone to know his next move. Was your rage out of line here? Your rage inappropriately touching a woman without her consent, following recent allegations involving Yana J. Oh shit, boys.
Just shut up a little bit. Really get in them. Really get in them a little more. You gotta really fucking get in them in a little more, alright? That's what I feel like you should be doing. Just shut up really and get in them and throw some shit like that. I ain't gonna tell you that, but...
He was definitely groping right here. That's the grope posture. I'm glad they put it in slow-mo so we could see the groping going on here. Also, the red flags. Guy's name is literally Your Rage. And he's becoming violent. This seems retarded. I don't know why people care. You just yoinked that? I did. Problem? Troll face? I do steal from my chat. Wait, that's really weird. Miami high school students in Finesse Fave stream claim clavicular 100% got with underage girls at their school and allege there is video proof? What the fuck? Oh, I just got so confused. I was looking at this like, why does Moon Moon look so different? But Dan's gaming, okay. Okay. I love you guys. Tomorrow I'm going to be here at 1 p.m. sharp. It's going to be amazing, okay? Stay safe. Ribriano, cappuccino, pappuccino, cappuccino, cappuccino. Be careful.